In the suffocating fog of Victorian London, a desperate nobleman bursts into 221B Baker Street, his trembling hands clutching a chilling letter. The frost will claim you, as it claimed your kin. The demon stirs. What is the Frosted Spire? A remote Yorkshire manor where unnatural ice creeps up walls in midsummer and blood-curdling screams echo at midnight? Is it truly a vengeful demon or a sinister human plot cloaked in legend? Join Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as they unravel a web of ancient betrayal, alchemical secrets, and a deadly freezing compound threatening to bury the truth in an icy grave. Each chapter unveils a new twist: cryptic runes, vanishing footprints, a cloaked figure in the mist leading to a heart-pounding showdown under a full moon. Will Holmes's razor-sharp logic defeat the demon, or will the spire's curse claim them all? Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Fog. The gaslight flickered against the damp cobblestones of Baker Street, casting long shadows that danced like specters in the London fog. It was a November evening in 1890, and the chill in the air seemed to seep through the very walls of 221B. I, Dr. John Watson, sat by the fire, my pen scratching notes for a case recently concluded, a trifling matter of a stolen sapphire, hardly worth the ink. Sherlock Holmes, however, was restless, his lean frame pacing before the window, his violin lying neglected on the table. His sharp eyes scanned the street below, as if willing some new mystery to emerge from the mist. "Watson," he said abruptly, turning from the window, "do you not find this infernal fog oppressive? It stifles the mind, dulls the senses. London is a graveyard tonight, and I am in want of a puzzle to stir the blood." I set down my pen, accustomed to his moods. "Surely, Holmes, even you must allow for a quiet evening now and then. The city cannot always produce a crime to suit your tastes." He gave a dismissive wave, his thin lips curling into a wry smile. "Quiet evenings are the bane of a reasoning mind. But mark my words, Watson, something stirs in this fog. I feel it." No sooner had he spoken than a sharp rap echoed from the door below. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps creaked on the stairs, followed by a softer tread, hesitant yet purposeful, Holmes's. Eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "A client," he murmured, striding to his chair and adopting an air of calm expectancy. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face pinched with unease. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. He insists it's urgent, though. He's a queer sort, pale as death and trembling like a leaf." "Show him in," Holmes said, his voice crisp. "And bring tea, Mrs. Hudson. Our guest may need warming." The man who entered was indeed a striking figure, though not for any grandeur. Lord Reginald Ashburn, as he introduced himself, was tall and gaunt, his face ashen beneath a shock of prematurely white hair. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted about the room as if expecting pursuit. His overcoat, though finely tailored, was rumpled, and his hands clutched a sealed envelope, its edges worn as if he'd handled it obsessively. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began, his voice a strained whisper. "I come to you in desperation. My family's estate, the Frosted Spire, is cursed. A demon haunts its halls, and I fear it will claim us all." Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "A demon, you say? A bold claim, Lord Ashburn. Pray, elaborate. I am all attention." Ashburn sank into a chair, his hands trembling as he handed Holmes the envelope. "This arrived 3 days ago, delivered by an unknown hand. It speaks." of things no living soul should know. Holmes slit the envelope with a letter opener, his movements precise. He unfolded a single sheet of parchment, its ink black and uneven, as if written in haste. He read aloud, "Lord of the Spire, your blood is forfeit. The frost will claim you as it claimed your kin. The demon stirs, and no prayer will save you. Flee or perish." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but a faint smile played at his lips. Unsigned, of course. And the handwriting deliberately altered. A clumsy attempt at disguise. What do you make of it, Watson? I frowned, studying the letter as Holmes held it up. It's theatrical, certainly. Meant to frighten. But a demon? Surely this is some prank or extortion. Perhaps, Holmes said, setting the letter aside. But the fear in our guest's eyes is real. Tell me, Lord Ashburn, what is this Frosted Spire, and why does it inspire such dread? Ashburn drew a shuddering breath. The Frosted Spire is my ancestral home, a manor in the Yorkshire moors, built in the 14th century. It's named for the frost that clings to its stones, even in summer, a phenomenon no one can explain. My family has lived there for generations. But the Tailies, they speak of a curse, a demon bound to the land. It was dormant, a mere legend, until a month ago. He paused, swallowing hard. It began with whispers in the night, like voices carried on the wind. Then the frost unnatural, thick, coating the windows and floors. Servants fled, claiming they saw a figure, cloaked and eyeless, moving through the halls. My sister, Eleanor, refuses to leave, but she's wasting away, terrified. I've tried priests, scholars none can help. You, Mr. Holmes, are my last hope. Holmes's expression was unreadable, but I knew that glint in his eyes. The word demon might amuse him, but the puzzle of unnatural frost and it terrified. Household was irresistible. This frost, he said. Describe it. Is it merely cold, or does it possess unusual properties? It's strange, Ashburn said. It forms patterns, like writing, but they vanish when touched. It's not just cold, it burns, leaves marks on the skin. And the air around it feels heavy, as if alive. Holmes leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly. Burns, you say curious, and this figure, has anyone seen it clearly? No, Ashburn admitted. It's always in shadow, glimpsed at the edge of sight. But the screams, God, the screams at midnight. They're not human. I shifted uncomfortably, the man's fear palpable. Holmes, this sounds like hysteria. Perhaps mass delusion. A remote manor, old legends, it's fertile ground for imagination. Imagination, Watson, is often the mask of truth, Holmes replied. Lord Ashburn, we shall accompany you to Yorkshire. I require data tangible, observable facts. Watson, pack for a cold journey. We leave on the morning train. Ashburn's relief was evident, though his hand still shook. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, but be warned, the Spire is no place for the faint-hearted. Holmes's smile was razor-sharp. I assure you, my heart is quite robust. Now, rest here tonight. You look in need of it. As Ashburn retired to a guest room, I turned to Holmes. Do you believe this talk of demons? I believe in nothing, Watson, until evidence compels me, he said, lighting his pipe. But frost in summer, burning cold, and a figure that eludes all eyes. That, my dear friend, is a problem worth solving. The next morning, we boarded the train to Yorkshire. the fog of London giving way to the bleak expanse of the moors. The journey was long, the landscape growing wilder with each mile, rolling hills of heather, jagged rocks, and a sky heavy with clouds. Holmes was silent, his mind already dissecting the case, while I tried to shake the unease Ashburn's tale had planted. We arrived at dusk, the Frosted Spire looming against the horizon, a Gothic pile of weathered stone, its towers clawing at the sky. Frost glittered on its walls, despite the mild autumn air, and the wind carried a low, mournful sound like a distant wail. Ashburn led us through iron gates, his face pale as he glanced at the manor. "Welcome to the Spire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the air was frigid, the halls dim and echoing. Tapestries hung threadbare, depicting knights and battles, their colors faded. The servants, few in number, moved like shadows, their eyes averted. Eleanor Ashburn, a frail young woman with haunted eyes, greeted us in the drawing room. Her hands were bandaged, and I noticed faint red burns, perhaps beneath the gauze. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I don't know what stalks this place, but it's real. Last night I saw it, a shape in the corridor, tall and cloaked. It looked at me." Holmes's gaze was piercing. "Did it speak? Move toward you?" "No," she said, shivering. "It just stood there, then vanished. But the frost followed, creeping up the walls. I thought I'd freeze where I stood." I placed a reassuring hand on her arm, noting her feverish warmth despite the cold. "You're safe now, Miss Ashburn. We'll get to the bottom of this." Holmes was already prowling the room, examining the windows, where frost traced delicate spiraling patterns. He scraped a sample into a vial, his movements precise. "Watson, observe this," he said, holding the vial to the light. "The frost is crystalline, almost granular, not typical of natural condensation." Before I could respond, a servant burst in, his face white. "My lord, it's happened again. The library frost everywhere, and a book. It's open, like someone was reading it." Holmes's eyes lit up. "Lead the way." The library was a cavernous room, its shelves sagging with ancient tomes. Frost coated the floor, crunching underfoot, and a heavy oak table bore a single book, open to a page of dense, handwritten script. Holmes bent over it, his magnifying glass glinting. "Old English," he murmured. "A journal, perhaps. And these markings runes, or something like them." I peered over his shoulder, the script illegible to me. "What does it say?" "It's a chronicle," Holmes said, his voice low. "It speaks of a guardian bound to the spire, a force of vengeance. Curious, though the ink is fresh in places, as if someone has added to it recently." Ashburn paled. "That's impossible. That book has been locked away for years." "Clearly not," Holmes said, snapping the book shut. "Someone in this house knows more than they admit. Watson will need to inspect every inch of this manor. Lord Ashburn, ensure no one leaves." As we left the library, the wind howled outside, and the frost seemed to thicken, curling up the walls like living tendrils. I felt a prickle of dread, but Holmes was undeterred, his mind already racing ahead. That night, we took rooms in the west wing, the cold seeping through the walls. Holmes sat by the fire, studying the journal, while I tried to sleep, my revolver close at hand. Around midnight, A scream tore through the silence, high, piercing, and unmistakably human. I bolted upright, heart pounding. "Holmes," I called. But he was already at the door, his dressing gown billowing as he strode into the hall. "Quickly, Watson. The game is afoot." We followed the sound to Eleanor's room, where we found her unharmed but trembling, pointing to the window. It was there. She gasped, the figure staring through the glass. Holmes examined the window, where frost formed a jagged pattern like a claw mark. "No footprints outside," he said, his voice calm but intense. "Yet the frost is fresh. Someone or something was here." As we calmed Eleanor, Holmes's expression was one of grim satisfaction. "Fear not, Miss Ashburn," he said. "This demon is no phantom. It is a trick, and I shall unmask it." The chapter drew to a close with Holmes standing by the window, staring into the fog-shrouded moors, his mind a whirl of deductions. I knew that look he was on the scent, and nothing would deter him. The Frosted Spire held its secrets tightly. But Sherlock Holmes was a hunter of truths, and the demon, whatever it was, would soon face his relentless logic. The manor seemed to hold its breath, the frost glinting like eyes in the dark, as we prepared for the next day's investigation. The mystery had begun, and though danger loomed, I felt a thrill at being by Holmes's side, ready to face whatever the spire concealed. Chapter 2. The frozen footprints, the Yorkshire moors, stretched endlessly before the Frosted Spire, a desolate expanse of heather and gorse, shrouded in a mist that clung to the earth like a living thing. The air was heavy with the scent of damp peat, and the sky above was a sullen gray, promising rain but withholding it, as if reluctant to disturb the eerie stillness. Sherlock Holmes, clad in his Inverness cape, stood at the edge of the manor's frost-rimed lawn, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. The frost was unnatural, a thin, crystalline sheen that sparkled in the weak morning light, defying the midsummer warmth that should have prevailed. Beside him, Dr. John Watson clutched his overcoat, his breath visible in the chill air, his face a mask of unease. "It's unnatural." "Holmes," Watson said, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "Frost in July? It's as if the seasons themselves have gone mad." Holmes did not reply immediately. He crouched, his long fingers brushing the frost, which crunched softly under his touch. His gaze was fixed on a series of marks in the icy crust footprints, irregular and oddly spaced, leading from the manor's rear entrance toward a distant copse of gnarled trees. The prints were neither wholly human nor distinctly animal. Their edges blurred as if the maker had moved with an unnatural gait. Holmes traced one with his fingertip, his expression unreadable. "Madness. Watson is a human affliction," he said at last, standing and brushing frost from his gloves. "The seasons are governed by laws, and so is this frost. These footprints, however, are a puzzle worth solving. Come." Watson followed as Holmes strode toward the copse, his steps purposeful yet cautious, as if he sensed the weight of unseen eyes. The manor loomed behind them, its Gothic spires piercing the mist, its windows dark and uninviting. The moans they had heard the previous night still lingered in Watson's memory, a low, mournful sound that seemed to rise from the very stones of the Frosted Spire. He glanced back, half expecting to see a figure watching from the upper windows, but there was only the mist swirling lazily. The footprints led to a crumbling stone circle, half hidden among the trees. The stones, weathered and moss-covered, stood like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with faint, unfamiliar runes. The frost was thicker here, coating the stones in a glistening sheen that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. The footprints ended abruptly at the circle's edge, as if their maker had vanished into thin air. Holmes knelt again, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the ground with meticulous care. No continuation. "Watson," he said, his voice tinged with a rare note of intrigue. "The prints cease here, yet there is no sign of disturbance, no scuff marks, no indication of a leap or climb. It is as if the ground itself swallowed the walker." Watson shivered, not entirely from the cold. "You don't believe in such nonsense, surely? A man doesn't simply vanish." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "A man does not, but a mystery might suggest otherwise until logic prevails. Observe the frost here thicker, more crystalline than elsewhere, and this." He reached into the frost and extracted a pinch of sparkling powder, holding it to the light. It glittered like ground glass, catching the weak sunlight in prismatic flecks. "A substance not native to this soil. I shall need to analyze it." Watson frowned, peering at the powder. Some kind of chemical? Could it be responsible for this frost? "Possibly," Holmes replied, slipping the sample into a small vial. "But its presence here, at the precise point where the footprints vanish, suggests intent. We are not dealing with a natural phenomenon, Watson, but a calculated one." They returned to the manor, where the servants were gathered in the great hall, their faces pale and their whispers hushed. Lord Ashburn, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that darted nervously, stood by the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. He had greeted Holmes and Watson the previous night with a mixture of relief and dread, his cryptic letter having promised answers but delivered only questions. The servants, under his orders, had prepared rooms for the detective and his companion, but their fear was palpable, their glances flitting toward the windows as if expecting something to emerge from the mist. Watson took it upon himself to question the staff, hoping to glean some insight into the manor's strange happenings. He approached a young housemaid, her hands trembling as she polished a candelabrum. "Miss," he began gently, "have you seen anything unusual these past nights? Anything that might explain the sounds we heard?" The maid, whose name was Eliza, glanced around nervously before speaking. "It's the demon, sir," she whispered. "It walks at midnight, a shadow in the frost. I saw it myself, tall, cloaked, with eyes like ice. It stood by the stone circle, and the air turned so cold I could scarce breathe." Watson noted her words, his skepticism tempered by her evident fear. Did it speak? Did it do anything? She shook her head. "It just watched. Then it was gone, like it melted into the mist. The others have seen it too, sir. We're all afraid to go out after dark." Watson thanked her and moved on to the butler, a stooped man named Hargreaves, whose lined face suggested years of service. "Hargreaves, what can you tell me about this demon? Is it a local legend or something new?" The butler's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing how much to reveal. "The Frosted Spire has always had its tales, sir," he said. "They say a spirit haunts these moors, bound to the stone circle by some ancient wrong. But these past weeks it's been different. The frost, the screams, it's no mere story now. It's real." Watson pressed further, but Hargreaves grew reticent. excusing himself to attend to duties. Frustrated but undeterred, Watson sought out the local vicar, a doorman named Reverend Halley, who lived in a small rectory a mile from the manor. The vicar received Watson in a cluttered study, its shelves lined with theological texts and local histories. Over a cup of weak tea, Halley shared a legend that sent a chill down Watson's spine. Centuries ago, Halley began, his voice low and measured, a knight named Sir Cedric Ashburn held these lands. He was betrayed by his own kin, murdered in the very shadow of the spire. His blood soaked the stones of the circle, and his dying curse bound his spirit to this place. They say he walks when the frost comes, seeking vengeance on his betrayers. Descendants. Watson listened intently, his mind racing to reconcile the tale with Holmes's insistence on a rational explanation. "And you believe this spirit is responsible for the current disturbances?" Hale's eyes darkened. "I believe in the sins of the past, Dr. Watson. Whether it's a spirit or something else, the Frosted Spire is cursed. You do well to leave before it claims you too." Returning to the manor, Watson found Holmes in the library, poring over the hidden journal they had discovered the previous night. The journal, bound in cracked leather, was written in a spidery hand, its pages filled with cryptic references to rituals and a frost that binds. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase as he deciphered a passage. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, his voice vibrant with discovery. "The journal speaks of a crystalline key that unlocks the power of the spire. It mentions the stone circle explicitly, suggesting a ritual performed under specific conditions. The frost, the footprints, the crystalline substance, all are connected." Watson relayed the vicar's tale and the servant's accounts, watching Holmes's expression shift from curiosity to calculation. "A betrayed knight, a vengeful spirit," Holmes mused. "A convenient story to mask a more tangible threat. The footprints and the substance suggest a human agent, Watson, not a ghost. Someone is using the legend to their advantage." As evening fell, the mist thickened, and a sudden wind howled across the moors, rattling the manor's windows. Holmes and Watson stood at the edge of the great hall, watching as the servants lit candles, their movements hurried and fearful. The temperature plummeted, the frost creeping up the window panes in intricate, unnatural patterns. Watson felt a prickle of dread, but Holmes remained unfazed, his mind already racing toward the next clue. "We must analyze the crystalline substance," Holmes said, holding up the vial. "If it is indeed the source of this frost, it may lead use to the so-called demon. I shall require the use of Lord Ashburn's study. His scientific inclinations suggest he has the necessary equipment." They made their way to the study, a cluttered room filled with books, vials, and strange instruments. Holmes set to work, his movements precise as he tested the substance with reagents and a small burner. Watson watched, marveling at his friend's ability to remain focused amidst the growing unease of the manor. After an hour, Holmes leaned back, a satisfied glint in his eye. "It is a compound, Watson," he said, "capable of inducing rapid freezing when exposed to air. Not a natural substance, but one engineered with considerable skill. This is no curse. It is chemistry, wielded with intent." Before Watson could respond, a low rumble shook the manor, followed by a gust of frigid air that extinguished the candles. The servants gasped, and Lord Ashburn appeared at the door, his face ashen. "It's happening again," he whispered. The demon comes. Holmes's eyes narrowed. There is no demon, Lord Ashburn, only a man who wishes us to believe in one. Watson, fetch your revolver. We may have need of it tonight. As they stepped into the hall, a blizzard roared outside, the wind screaming like a living thing. The frost thickened on the windows, forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate spirals, runes, a mocking imitation of the stone circle's carvings. Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding, while Holmes's face was alight with determination. "We are close, Watson," he said, his voice steady. "The demon is no spirit, but a fabrication, and I intend to unmask it before this night is through." The storm intensified, trapping them within the manor's walls. As the mystery of the Frosted Spire deepened, its secrets buried in frost and shadow. Chapter 3. The Locked Room Riddle. The frost clung to the windows of the Frosted Spire like a shroud, its delicate patterns belying the menace that seemed to permeate the manor. The air inside was heavy, each breath visible in the dim light of the gas lamps that flickered against the ancient stone walls. Sherlock Holmes stood in the center of the great hall, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, his mind already dissecting the peculiarities of the case. The eerie scream from the previous night still lingered in Dr. John Watson's memory, though he tried to dismiss it as a trick of the wind across the Yorkshire moors. Yet the unease in his gut told him otherwise. Holmes, clad in his Inverness cape, moved with deliberate precision, his boots echoing softly on the polished oak floor. "Watson," he said, his voice low but commanding, "the scream we heard last night was no mere atmospheric anomaly. It was human, or at least intended to sound so." He paused, his gaze fixed on a portrait of a stern-faced Ashburn ancestor whose eyes seemed to follow them. "We must proceed with utmost caution. The Frosted Spire holds secrets, and I suspect they are not all supernatural in nature." Watson nodded, adjusting his scarf against the chill that seemed to seep through the walls. "You think this demon is a fabrication, then? A ruse to frighten Lord Ashburn?" Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. "Precisely. But a ruse with a purpose, Watson. Fear is a powerful motivator, and someone or something wants the inhabitants of this manor to flee. Or worse." He turned abruptly, striding toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. "Come, we have much to investigate before the day is out." The manor was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each more opulent and foreboding than the last. Tapestries depicting medieval battles hung alongside suits of armor, their empty visors seeming to watch the intruders. Watson followed Holmes, his notebook in hand, ready to record every detail. The servants, pale and jittery, avoided eye contact, their whispers ceasing whenever the two men approached. The atmosphere was one of dread, and Watson could not shake the feeling that the manor itself was alive, watching their every move. Their first stop was the library, a cavernous room lined with bookshelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the frost-covered windows. Holmes moved to a desk cluttered with papers, his fingers deftly sifting through them. "Lord Ashburn is a man of science, it seems," he remarked, holding up a sheet filled with chemical equations. "These notes suggest experiments of a peculiar nature, cryogenic in focus, perhaps. Curious for a nobleman, don't you think?" Watson frowned, peering over Holmes's shoulder. "Cryogenic? You mean freezing things? In this weather, it seems redundant." Holmes chuckled softly. Not if one seeks to control the cold, Watson, or to weaponize it. He pocketed a few pages, his eyes gleaming with interest. We must find his laboratory. If Ashburn is conducting experiments, they may hold the key to this so-called demon. Before they could proceed, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence, echoing through the manor's stone walls. Watson's hand instinctively went to the revolver in his coat pocket, while Holmes's head snapped up, his expression one of intense focus. "That came from the east wing," he said, already moving toward the door. "Quickly, Watson." They raced through the corridors, the scream's echoes guiding them to a locked door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The servants had gathered, their faces ashen, murmuring prayers and clutching at one another. Holmes pushed through them, his voice sharp. "Who is inside? Speak." A trembling maid, no older than 20, stepped forward. It's Mary, sir, the chambermaid. She went in to clean the room, and then we heard her scream. The door's locked, and she won't answer." Holmes knelt before the heavy oak door, examining the lock with a magnifying glass. "No signs of tampering," he muttered. "The key is still in the lock, turned from the inside." He stood, addressing the butler, a gaunt man named Harrow. "Fetch the spare key immediately." Harrow hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. "There is no spare, sir. That room, it's one of the old ones. Only one key exists." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he wasted no time. "Watson, your shoulder, if you please." Together, they rammed the door, the wood splintering under their combined force. It gave way with a groan, revealing a scene that froze Watson's blood. Mary, the chambermaid, lay sprawled on the floor, her body encased in a thin layer of ice that shimmered in the faint light. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The room was otherwise empty, the windows shut tight, the air unnaturally cold. Holmes knelt beside the body, his gloved hands carefully inspecting the ice. "Remarkable," he murmured. "This ice is not natural. There is no water source in this room, no sign of condensation or leakage. Yet her body is encased as if plunged into a frozen lake." He scraped a sample of the ice into a vial, his movements precise. "And note the absence of frostbite on her extremities." This was instantaneous. Watson, his medical instincts kicking in, checked for a pulse, though he knew it was futile. "She's dead, Holmes, but how? There's no wound, no sign of struggle. And this ice, it's impossible." "Nothing is impossible, Watson," Holmes replied, standing. "Improbable, perhaps, but not impossible. This is the work of a chemical agent, one capable of inducing rapid freezing. I suspect it is related to the crystalline substance I found near the footprints yesterday." He moved to the window, inspecting the frame. Locked from the inside. As expected, no signs of forced entry. The killer did not enter or exit through this window. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room. A locked room, a frozen corpse, and no apparent means of delivery. A riddle, indeed. The servants were dismissed, their whispers growing louder as they retreated. Watson watched Holmes pace the room, his mind clearly racing. What now? "Holmes, this is no ordinary murder." Holmes stopped, his eyes glinting. "We must locate Lord Ashbourne's laboratory. If my suspicions are correct, the answer lies there. But first, we must examine the body more closely. Watson, your medical." Expertise will be invaluable. They moved Mary's body to a nearby table, the ice cracking slightly under her weight. Watson conducted a thorough examination, noting the absence of any physical trauma. Her heart stopped, likely from shock or extreme cold, he said. But there's no sign of how the cold was applied. No burns, no chemical residue on her. Skin, Holmes nodded, his attention drawn to a faint shimmer on the floor near the body. He knelt, scraping up a small amount of the crystalline substance he had seen before. This is the key, Watson. This compound is not naturally occurring in this region. It is the product of deliberate synthesis. Their investigation was interrupted by a commotion downstairs. Harrow burst into the room, his face pale. My. Lord, it's Lord Ashburn. He's locked himself in his study, and there's smoke coming from under the door. Holmes and Watson raced to the study, finding the door barred. The smell of burning paper was unmistakable. Holmes pounded on the door. Lord Ashburn, open this door at once. A muffled voice replied, trembling but defiant. I cannot, Mr. Holmes. The evidence, it must be destroyed. For the sake of the spire, Holmes's eyes flashed with urgency. Watson, the door. Once again, they forced their way in, revealing Lord Ashburn standing over a small fire. Papers crackling in the flames. Holmes lunged forward, snatching a handful of documents from the blaze before they were consumed. Ashburn, a wiry man with haunted eyes, collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling. Explain yourself, sir, Holmes demanded, extinguishing the fire with a nearby rug. Why destroy evidence in a murder investigation? Ashburn's voice was barely a whisper. I thought it was the only way. The experiments, they've gone too far. The demon, it's my fault. Holmes's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. Lord Ashburn, there is no demon. Only a man or men using science to create terror. Now, tell me about your experiments. Reluctantly, Ashburn led them to a hidden panel behind a bookshelf. It opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. My laboratory, he said. I've been working on unconventional compounds. I thought I could harness the cold, use it for preservation, for medicine. But someone else, they've twisted it. The laboratory was a marvel of Victorian science, filled with glass vials, bubbling retorts, and shelves of alchemical texts. Holmes's eyes lit up as he examined the equipment. This is no amateur's workshop, he said. You've been synthesizing a cryogenic compound, haven't you? Ashburn nodded, shame etched into his features. I called it cryon. It induces rapid freezing, far beyond natural means. I thought it could revolutionize industry, but someone stole my notes. I believe they've used it to kill. Holmes's fingers traced a row of vials, stopping at one labeled cryon prototype. He pocketed it, his mind clearly racing. This explains the maid's death. A concentrated dose, likely aerosolized, could freeze her instantly. But how was it delivered in a locked room? Watson, rifling through a stack of papers, paused. Holmes, look at this. He held up a journal, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and coded text. It's the same journal you found yesterday, but this section is new. It mentions a ritual at the stone circle. Holmes took the journal, his eyes scanning the pages. A cipher, and not a complex one. This speaks of a binding ritual tied to the spire's curse. But I suspect it's a cover for something far more mundane, a plan to terrorize and control. He deciphered a line aloud. The frost shall claim the betrayer's blood. It's theatrical. Watson meant to inspire fear. Their conversation was cut short by a loud crash from above. Holmes and Watson raced back to the main hall, finding a shattered chandelier on the floor, its crystals scattered like frost. Harrow stood nearby, his face pale. It fell. Sir, no one was near it. Holmes examined the wreckage, his brow furrowed. Sabotage, he said. Someone wants to keep us on edge. Watson, we must secure this manor. No one leaves until we've searched every room. The rest of the day was spent combing the manor, interviewing servants, and cataloging evidence. Holmes found traces of the Cryon compound in several rooms, always near windows or vents, suggesting a delivery mechanism. Watson uncovered a hidden ledger in Ashbourne's study, detailing payments to a Dr. M. Grimshaw, a name that sent a chill down his spine. Holmes, could this be the man behind it? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Possibly. A disgraced chemist, perhaps, with a grudge against Ashbourne. We must find him. But first, we return to the locked room. I have a theory. Back in the chambermaid's room, Holmes paced the floor, his mind reconstructing the scene. The Cryon was released through the ventilation system, he said, pointing to a small grate above the door. A time device, perhaps, or a remote trigger. The killer never needed to enter the room. Watson nodded, impressed but uneasy. So, we're dealing with a murderer who can kill without being seen. That's diabolical. Holmes's smile was grim, diabolical but human, and humans make mistakes. We will find this one, Watson, and bring him to justice. As night fell, the manor grew colder, the frost on the windows thickening. Holmes and Watson sat by the fire in the grate. Hall, the journal and Cryon vial on the table before them. Tomorrow, we focus on the stone circle, Holmes said. The ritual mentioned in the journal is the key to this charade, and I suspect our killer will be there, waiting. Watson shivered, not entirely from the cold. Holmes, do you really think we can stop this, whatever it is? Holmes's eyes were steady, unyielding. I do not believe in demons, Watson. Only in men who play at being gods. And gods, as you know, can be brought low. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled, and the frosted spire seemed to groan under the weight of its secrets. Holmes leaned back, his pipe in hand, his mind already plotting the next move in this deadly game of logic and deception. Chapter 4. The shadow in the spire. The moon hung low over the Yorkshire moors, its pale light casting jagged shadows across the frost-rimed grounds of the Frosted Spire. Sherlock Holmes stood motionless near the ancient stone circle, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. The air was thick with mist, curling like ghostly tendrils around the gnarled trees that bordered the manor's desolate estate. Beside him, Dr. John Watson shifted uneasily, his breath visible in the chill, his hand resting on the revolver in his coat pocket. The eerie moans they had heard upon their arrival 2 nights ago seemed to linger in the air, though Holmes had dismissed them as mere acoustics of the manor's hollow architecture. Yet, as the clock in the distant village struck midnight, a prickle of anticipation ran through Watson, his nerves taut as a bowstring. Holmes, as ever, was the picture of calm precision. His long, lean figure was wrapped in a heavy overcoat, the collar turned up against the biting wind. his eyes keen, as a hawk's darted from the frost-covered stones to the faint path leading back to the manor. The vanishing footprints they had discovered earlier that day, neither human nor animal, according to Holmes's meticulous analysis, had led them here, to this ancient circle where the manor's secrets seemed to converge. The detective had insisted on a midnight vigil, convinced that the so-called demon of the spire would reveal itself under the cover of darkness. Watson, though skeptical of specters, could not shake the unease that clung to him like the damp cold of the moor. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves, "are you certain this is wise?" The servants spoke of a figure seen at this hour, a phantom, they called it. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint, wry smile. "My dear Watson, phantoms do not leave footprints, nor do they scatter crystalline residues. Whatever haunts this place is bound by the laws of nature, not superstition. We shall meet our demon tonight, and I wager it will prove disappointingly corporeal." Watson nodded, though his grip on the revolver tightened. He trusted Holmes's logic implicitly, but the oppressive atmosphere of the spire tested even his seasoned resolve. The manor itself loomed in the distance, its Gothic silhouette stark against the moonlit sky, its tallest tower, the spire, gleaming with an unnatural sheen of frost. The screams they had heard the previous night still echoed in Watson's mind, though Holmes had attributed them to a combination of wind and human fear. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, Watson could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Holmes raised a hand, signaling silence. His head tilted slightly, as if catching a sound too faint for Watson's ears. "There," he murmured, pointing toward a cluster of gnarled oaks at the edge of the circle. Watson strained his eyes but saw nothing beyond the shifting shadows. Then, faintly, a low chant drifted through the mystic guttural, rhythmic sound, like words spoken in a tongue long forgotten. The hairs on Watson's neck stood on end, and even Holmes's expression tightened, though his eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "Stay low," Holmes whispered, moving with the stealth of a cat toward the source of the sound. Watson followed, his boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. The chant grew louder, its cadence strange and disjointed, as if the speaker were struggling to recall the words. They reached the oaks, and Holmes crouched behind a gnarled trunk, motioning for Watson to do the same. Through the mist, a figure emerged, a cloaked silhouette standing within the stone circle, its back to them. The figure's arms were raised, and the chant rose in intensity, the words now discernible as a distorted form of Old English. Though Watson could make little sense of them, Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind already dissecting the scene. "Note the posture," he whispered, "theatrical, but deliberate. This is no idle ritual. Our quarry seeks to evoke fear, not summon spirits." Before Watson could respond, the figure turned sharply, as if sensing their presence. The chant ceased, and for a fleeting moment, Watson glimpsed a pale face beneath the hood gaunt, with eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity. Then, with a swirl of the cloak, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving only the echo of its chant behind. Holmes sprang to his feet, his coat billowing as he darted toward the spot where the figure had stood. "After it, Watson," he called, his voice sharp with urgency. Watson followed, his heart pounding as they plunged into the fog. The ground was uneven, and the frost made each step treacherous, but Holmes moved with the certainty of a bloodhound on the scent. They reached the edge of the circle, where the footprints they had followed earlier reappeared, leading into the dense undergrowth. But just as before, the trail ended abruptly, as if the figure had dissolved into the air. Holmes knelt, examining the ground with his magnifying glass. "Curious," he muttered. "The prints are fresh, yet they cease without explanation. No sign of a leap or climb. Our demon is clever, Watson, but not supernatural." Watson caught his breath, scanning the darkness. Could it have doubled back? Or perhaps there's a hidden trapdoor. Holmes shook his head. Unlikely. The soil here is undisturbed, and the frost would betray any concealed mechanism. No, this is a trick of misdirection. Our quarry wants us to believe in the impossible. He rose, pocketing his glass. "Come, Watson. The manor holds the answers. We must search its depths." They retraced their steps to the Frosted Spire, the cold biting deeper as the night wore on. The manor's heavy oak doors creaked as they entered, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the icy moor. The servants had retired, and the halls were silent, save for the distant creak of the spire's ancient timbers. Holmes led the way to the library, where the journal they had found earlier, a tattered volume bound in cracked leather, lay on a mahogany table. Its cryptic entries had hinted at an ancient curse, but Holmes was convinced it held more practical secrets. As Holmes pored over the journal, Watson's attention was drawn to a massive bookshelf that dominated the room. Its ornate carvings depicted scenes of knights and battles, their details worn but still discernible. On a whim, Watson ran his fingers along the edge of the shelf, feeling for anything unusual. His hand paused at a carving of a knight wielding a dagger, its blade pointed downward. The carving seemed slightly misaligned, and when Watson pressed it, a soft click echoed through the room. "Holmes," Watson called, stepping back as the bookshelf shuddered and began to slide sideways, revealing a narrow passage. Dust motes swirled in the moonlight streaming through a nearby window, illuminating a stone staircase that descended into darkness. Holmes looked up from the journal, his eyes alight with interest. "Well done, Watson. I suspected the manor held hidden passages, but you've saved us hours of searching." He lit a lantern from the table and gestured for Watson to follow. "Let us see where this leads." The passage was cramped and damp, its walls slick with moisture. The air grew colder as they descended, and Watson's breath came in short puffs. The staircase ended at a heavy iron door, its surface etched with symbols that matched those in the journal spirals and runes that seemed to pulse faintly in the lantern's glow. Holmes examined the door, his fingers tracing the carvings. "These symbols," he said, "are not mere decoration. They correspond to the cipher in the journal. A key, perhaps, to a greater secret." He pushed against the door, and it groaned open, revealing a cavernous chamber below the manor. The crypt was vast, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids carved with effigies of knights in armor. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested a collection of relics, an ancient chalice, a rusted sword, and a small, intricately carved box. Each bore the same symbols as the journal and the door. Watson felt a chill that had little to do with the cold, his mind conjuring images of the spectral figure they had seen at the stone circle. Holmes approached the pedestal, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the relics. "These are the remnants of the Ashburn family's past," he said. "The journal spoke of a betrayal, a knight wronged centuries ago. These relics are tied to that history, and our demon is exploiting it." Watson frowned, his hand still on his revolver. But why? To what end? Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Fear, Watson. Fear is a powerful weapon. The demon is no spirit, but a fabrication, a carefully crafted illusion to drive Lord Ashburn from his home or to conceal a greater crime. The crystalline substance, the footprints, the chants, all are tools of a human mind, not a supernatural." As they examined the relics, a faint glow caught Watson's eye. It came from the direction of the spire's tallest tower, visible through a narrow slit in the crypt's wall. The light flickered, pale and unnatural, like the frost that clung to the manor stones. Watson pointed it out, and Holmes's expression hardened. "The tower," he said. "Our quarry is bold to stage their performance so openly. Come, Watson, we have a shadow to catch." They ascended from the crypt, sealing the passage behind them. The manor was silent, but the air felt charged, as if the very walls anticipated what was to come. Holmes led the way to the base of the spire, a spiraling staircase that wound upward into the darkness. The frost was thicker here, coating the steps in a slick sheen. Watson gripped the railing, his heart pounding as they climbed. At the top, they found a heavy door, slightly ajar. Holmes pushed it open, revealing a circular chamber bathed in the same pale glow they had seen from below. The room was bare, save for a single window that overlooked the moors. The frost was thickest here, forming intricate patterns on the glass, as if nature itself were conspiring to seal the spire's secrets. Holmes stepped forward, his lantern casting long shadows. "The light," he said, his voice low. "It's artificial, a chemical reaction. The same compound we found near the footprints, no doubt." He examined the floor, where faint traces of the crystalline substance glimmered in the lantern's glow. Watson scanned the room, his revolver at the ready. "Where's the figure? It can't have vanished again." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "It hasn't. Look." He pointed to a corner of the room, where a faint seam in the wall suggested another hidden passage. Before they could investigate, a low moan echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating down the stairs. Holmes was already moving, his lantern swinging as he pursued the sound. Watson followed, the cold air burning his lungs as they descended the spire. The footsteps led them back to the main hall, where they found the front doors flung open, the mist pouring in like a living thing. Holmes paused, his mind racing. "There, leading us back to the circle," he said. "A distraction, perhaps, but we'll play their game for now." They stepped back into the night, the moor stretching before them like a sea of shadows. The stone circle was barely visible through the fog, but the chant had resumed, fainter now, as if mocking their pursuit. Holmes's expression was grim, but his eyes burned with determination. "We're close, Watson," he said. "The demon is no ghost, but a shadow cast by a very human hand. Tomorrow we'll uncover the truth behind these theatrics. For now, let us return to the manor and prepare." As they made their way back, the glow in the spire's tower flickered and died, leaving only darkness in its wake. Watson glanced at Holmes, who was already lost in thought, his mind piecing together the puzzle of the Frosted Spire. Whatever the truth, Watson knew one thing for certain. Sherlock Holmes would not rest until the shadow in the spire was brought to light. The night passed uneventfully, though sleep eluded Watson. His dreams were haunted by the cloaked figure, its burning eyes staring through the mist. When morning came, the manor was shrouded in a fresh layer of frost, as if the spire itself were breathing cold defiance. Holmes was already at work, the journal opened before him, his fingers stained with ink as he deciphered its cryptic passages. "Watson," he said, not looking up, "the chant we heard last night, it's a corruption of an old English lament, likely tied to the betrayal mentioned in the journal. Our demon is drawing on history to craft their illusion, but history is not their true motive." Watson poured himself a cup of tea, his hand still unsteady from the night's events. "Then what is revenge? Greed?" Holmes's eyes flicked up, sharp and piercing. "Both, perhaps. The relics in the crypt, the crystalline substance, the staged appearances all point to a scheme rooted in the present, not the past. Lord Ashburn is hiding something, and our cloaked friend seeks to exploit it." They spent the morning combing the manor for further clues. Watson interviewed the servants again, but their stories remained consistent. A spectral figure, moans in the night, and a growing fear that the curse was real. Holmes, meanwhile, focused on the library, where he discovered a hidden compartment in the desk. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, its edges brittle with age. The writing was in the same cipher as the journal, and Holmes set to work decoding it. By midday, he had made progress. "This," he said, holding up the parchment, "is a map of sorts. It details a network of passages beneath the manor, connecting the crypt to the stone circle and beyond. Our demon is using these tunnels to move unseen." Watson frowned. "But why the theatrics? Why not simply confront Ashburn?" Holmes's smile was grim. "Because fear is more effective than force. A man like Ashburn, steeped in the weight of his family's history, is vulnerable to superstition. Our quarry knows this and uses it to their advantage." Their next step was to explore the passages. Armed with lanterns and Holmes's map, they returned to the crypt, where the iron door stood as they had left it. The air was colder now, the frost creeping up the walls like ivy. Holmes traced the symbols on the door, his fingers lingering on a spiral that seemed to glow faintly. "This symbol," he said, "is the key. It appears repeatedly in the journal and the relics. I suspect it's a marker guiding us to the heart of the mystery." They followed the map through a maze of tunnels, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the damp stone. The passages were ancient, their walls carved with scenes of battles and betrayals, echoing the manor's grim history. Watson's unease grew with each step, but Holmes pressed on, his focus unyielding. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves of ancient texts and alchemical instruments. At the center stood a table, upon which rested a vial of the crystalline substance Holmes had found near the footprints. Beside it was a notebook, its pages filled with chemical formulas and diagrams. Holmes seized the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages. "This is it, Watson," he said. "The formula for the freezing compound. Our demon is no alchemist, but a chemist, a modern mind cloaked in medieval trappings." Watson peered over his shoulder, his medical training kicking in. "This compound, it's unlike anything I've seen. It could induce rapid freezing, perhaps even explain the maid's death in the locked room." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. The demon is using science to mimic the supernatural. But to what end? That is the question." Their exploration was cut short by a faint sound, a low, rhythmic chant echoing through the tunnels. Holmes's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "They're back," he said. "And this time we'll catch them." They followed the sound, moving swiftly through the passages. The chant grew louder, its cadence familiar from the stone circle. They emerged near the manor's stables, where the mist was thick and the frost glittered under the midday sun. Through the fog, Watson glimpsed the cloaked figure standing at the edge of the grounds, its arms raised as if in supplication. Holmes sprinted forward, his lantern swinging wildly. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the mist. The figure turned, its face obscured, and for a moment Watson thought he saw those burning eyes again. Then the figure fled, vanishing into the moor. Holmes cursed under his breath, a rare lapse in his composure. "They're toying with us," he said, "but they've made a mistake. The notebook, the tunnels, the compound, they're leaving. A trail." They returned to the manor, where Lord Ashburn awaited them, his face pale and drawn. He had heard of their discovery in the crypt and was visibly shaken. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice trembling, "is it true? Is the curse real?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "There is no curse, Lord Ashburn. Only a man or men playing a dangerous game. Tell me, what do you know of Dr. Mortimer?" "Grimshaw?" Ashburn's eyes widened, and for a moment Watson thought he might faint. "Grimshaw?" he whispered. "He was a colleague years ago. A brilliant chemist, but disgraced. He swore revenge when I refused to fund his experiments." Holmes's smile was cold. "Then we have our shadow, but he is not alone. The passages, the relics, the chant, they suggest a deeper conspiracy, one rooted in your family's past." The day wore on, with Holmes and Watson piecing together the clues. The notebook confirmed that the crystalline substance was a chemical agent capable of inducing rapid freezing, likely the cause of the maid's death. The tunnels suggested a long-planned scheme, with Grimshaw or his allies using the manors. Secrets to their advantage. The chant, Holmes deduced, was a deliberate echo of the Old English lament, designed to evoke the legend of the betrayed knight and sow fear. As night fell, the frost thickened, coating the manor in a crystalline sheen. Holmes stood at the window, staring out at the moor. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll confront our shadow. Grimshaw is close, and he's growing careless. The Spire's secrets are unraveling, Watson, and we'll be there to catch them when they fall." Watson nodded, though his heart was heavy. The manor, the moor, the figure in the mist, all seemed to conspire against them. But with Holmes at his side, he felt a flicker of hope. The shadow in the spire would not elude them for long. Chapter 5. The Alchemist's Secret. The frost clung to the frosted spire like a second skin, its icy tendrils creeping up the manor's ancient stone walls, defying the faint warmth of the midsummer sun. Sherlock Holmes stood in the manor's dimly lit study, his sharp eyes fixed on the small vial of crystalline substance he had collected near the stone circle. The granules glittered under the flickering gaslight, their unnatural sheen hinting at properties beyond ordinary chemistry. Dr. John Watson, seated by the fire, watched his friend with a mix of curiosity and unease, his notebook open but untouched, the eerie moans from the previous night still echoing in his memory. "Holmes," Watson ventured, breaking the silence, "that substance, do you truly believe it's the key to this so-called demon?" Holmes didn't look up, his fingers delicately tilting the vial. "Belief is irrelevant, Watson. The evidence speaks." This compound is no mere frost. Its structure suggests a chemical capable of inducing rapid freezing far beyond the natural limits of this climate. The question is not whether it's key, but how it's being wielded and by whom. Watson frowned, glancing at the frost-rimmed window. You're suggesting someone is manufacturing this ice. To what end? To terrorize, to control, or perhaps to destroy, Holmes replied, his voice calm but edged with intensity. The manor's isolation, the legend of a curse, the spectral figure, these are not random. They are orchestrated. And this, he held up the vial, is the instrument. Holmes set the vial down and moved to the desk, where he had spread out the journal found in the manor's library. Its brittle pages, filled with cryptic notes and diagrams, had consumed his attention. Since dawn. He traced a finger over a sketch of the stone circle, annotated with symbols that matched those on the relics in the crypt. The journal is our map, Watson. It points to a mind steeped in alchemical lore, but one grounded in modern science. Whoever is behind this demon is no phantom. They are a chemist, and a formidable one. Watson rose, joining Holmes at the desk. Lord Ashburn, then. The servants mentioned his reclusive habits, and you saw that hidden laboratory. He's been conducting experiments, hasn't he? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Astute. Watson, but incomplete. Ashburn is involved, but his fear is genuine. The letter that summoned us was not the work of a mastermind. It was a plea. No, the hand behind this is colder, more calculating. We must uncover the laboratory's secrets to confirm my suspicions. The hidden laboratory, discovered by Watson the previous day, lay behind a false panel in the manor's west wing. Its existence had been a revelation, tucked away in a chamber filled with glass vials, burners, and shelves of arcane texts. The air had carried a sharp metallic tang, and the walls were lined with diagrams of chemical processes Watson couldn't begin to decipher. Holmes, however, had been electrified, his mind racing as he catalogued every detail. They descended to the laboratory now, the manor's corridors silent save for the creak of floorboards and the distant howl of the wind. The false panel slid open with a groan, revealing the stone staircase that led to the underground chamber. Holmes lit a lantern, its glow casting long shadows across the laboratory's cluttered surfaces. The air was colder here, the frost thicker. As if the room itself were complicit in the manor's mysteries, Holmes moved with purpose, inspecting the equipment. Note the precision of these instruments, Watson. This is no amateur's workshop. The burners are German-made, the glassware of the highest quality. Someone with resources and knowledge has been at work here. Watson examined a shelf of books. Their spines worn, but titles legible: De Alchemia, Theatrum Chemicum, and a modern treatise on cryogenics. Cryogenics? He said, puzzled. That's the study of extreme cold, isn't it? Could it explain the maid's death, the ice encasing her body? Precisely, Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. The maid's death was no supernatural event. The absence of water in that locked room suggests a chemical reaction, one that could only be triggered by a substance like our crystalline friend. He gestured to a workbench where a small crucible held more of the glittering granules. This compound, when activated, absorbs heat at an extraordinary rate, creating ice in seconds. It's a marvel of chemistry and a weapon. Holmes carefully scooped a sample into a glass tube, sealing it with a cork. We'll need to analyze this further, but I suspect it's a derivative of a rare mineral, perhaps manipulated through a process described in these texts. The journal mentioned a ritual at the stone circle, likely a misdirection to mask the scientific truth. Watson's brow furrowed. But why go to such lengths? If this is a chemical weapon, why the theatrics? Of a demon and a curse? Holmes paused, his gaze distant. Fear, Watson. Fear is a powerful tool. A demon terrifies the superstitious, distracts the curious, and conceals the truth. Whoever wields this compound wants the spire or something within it. The curse, the frost, the spectral figure, they're all part of a performance. Their work was interrupted by a sharp knock at the manor's front door, echoing through the stone walls. Watson glanced at Holmes, who nodded. They ascended to the main hall, where a servant admitted a frail, white-haired man in a vicar's collar. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn Bible. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the vicar said, his voice quavering. "I am Reverend Hawthorne. I heard you were investigating the disturbances. I must warn you, the spire is cursed. The demon is real. I've seen it, a shadow in the mist, its eyes like burning ice." Holmes's expression remained impassive. "Reverend, I appreciate your concern, but shadows and eyes are often tricks of the mind. Have you any evidence beyond sightings?" The vicar hesitated, then produced a small, leather-bound book. "This is a parish record from the 14th century. It speaks of Sir Cedric, a knight betrayed by his brother, Alaric, for the spire's lands. Cedric's blood was spilled in the stone circle, and his spirit vowed vengeance. The frost began then, and it returns whenever the Ashburn line is threatened." Holmes took the book, flipping through its brittle pages. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A historical precedent for the legend. But tell me, Reverend, have you noticed anyone unusual in the village? A stranger, perhaps, with an interest in the spire?" The vicar frowned. "There is a new doctor, Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw. He arrived a month ago, claiming to treat the village's ailments, but he's odd. Keeps to himself, and his medicines smell strange, like metal and frost." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Grimshaw, you say? Where might we find him?" "He lodges at the Black Heron," the vicar replied. "But be cautious, Mr. Holmes. There's something unnatural about him." After the vicar left, Holmes turned to Watson. "Grimshaw, a chemist, posing as a doctor in a village plagued by frost. This is no coincidence. We must visit the Black Hare at once." The village of Ashmore lay a mile from the spire, its cobblestone streets shrouded in mist. The Black Heron was a squat timber-bird building, its sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ale and smoke. The innkeeper, a burly man with a scarred face, directed them to a room upstairs where Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw was said to reside. Holmes knocked, and a thin, sallow-faced man opened the door. His eyes, sharp and cold, darted between Holmes and Watson. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice clipped. "Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective," Holmes said smoothly. "And my colleague, Dr. Watson. We're investigating certain phenomena at the Frosted Spire. May we speak with you?" Grimshaw's expression hardened, but he stepped aside. The room was sparse, save for a desk cluttered with vials, papers, and a small burner. The metallic tang Watson had noticed in the trits in the commodist. Laboratory was stronger here, almost overpowering. I'm a doctor, not a conjurer, Grimshaw said, folding his arms. I know nothing of demons or curses. Holmes's gaze swept the room, lingering on the vials. Your medicines, Dr. Grimshaw, seem unconventional. Might I examine one? Grimshaw hesitated, then handed Holmes a small bottle filled with a clear liquid. Holmes uncorked it, sniffing carefully. Interesting. A compound with a base of ammonium nitrate, perhaps? Curious choice for a village doctor. Grimshaw's jaw tightened. I treat my patients as I see fit. Now, if you'll excuse me. Before he could finish, a commotion erupted outside. A woman's scream cut through the fog, followed by shouts. Holmes and Watson rushed to the window, seeing villagers gathered around the well in the square. A bucket, freshly drawn, glittered with frost, its contents frozen solid despite the summer air. Holmes turned to Grimshaw, his voice low. A curious phenomenon, wouldn't you say? Almost as if someone had introduced a freezing agent into the water supply. Grimshaw's face paled, but he said nothing. Holmes and Watson descended to the square, where the villagers were in a panic. The demon's curse, one cried. It's spreading. Holmes knelt by the well, examining the bucket. He dipped a finger into the ice, then tasted it cautiously. The same compound, he murmured to Watson. Grimshaw's work. No doubt. He's testing his weapon, or perhaps signaling his intent. They returned to the inn, but Grimshaw was gone, his room empty save for a spilled vial and a crumpled note. Holmes unfolded it, reading aloud, The spire will fall. The debt will be paid. The handwriting matched the coded notes in the journal. He's escalating, Holmes said, his tone grim. We must act quickly. If Grimshaw is poisoning the village's water, he's capable of far worse at the spire. They hurried back to the manor, where Holmes analyzed the new sample alongside the crystalline substance. Under a magnifying glass, the granules revealed a complex structure, a blend of rare minerals and synthetic compounds. This is no mere alchemical relic, Holmes said. It's a modern creation designed to induce freezing at an unprecedented rate. Grimshaw has refined it, likely with knowledge gleaned from Ashburn's experiments. Watson paced, his mind racing. But why the spire? Why terrorize Ashburn and the village? Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. The journal hints at a historical grudge, and the vicar's record confirms it. Grimshaw may be a descendant of Alaric, the betrayer, seeking to reclaim. The spire, the demon, is his tool, a chemical terror to drive Ashburn out. But there's more. The stone circle, the relics, the ritual, they suggest a deeper purpose, perhaps tied to the spire's ancient secrets. As night fell, Holmes and Watson returned to the laboratory, determined to uncover Ashburn's role. They confronted the Lord in his study, where he sat hunched over a glass of brandy, his face haggard. Lord Ashburn, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the silence, your experiments have endangered this manor. The crystalline substance, the freezing depths explain yourself. Ashburn's hands trembled, spilling the brandy. I sought to undo the curse, he stammered. My family has lived in its shadow for centuries. I studied alchemy, then chemistry, hoping to understand the frost. I created the compound, yes, but I never meant for it to be used this way. Grimshaw, he was my assistant, years ago. He stole my notes, my formulas. I thought he was gone, but now, Holmes's eyes narrowed. You knew of Grimshaw's presence in the village and said nothing? I was afraid, Ashburn whispered. He threatened to expose me, to ruin my name. I thought I could handle it alone. Holmes's voice was cold. Your silence has cost lives. Where is Grimshaw now? I don't know, Ashburn said, his voice breaking. He spoke of the stone circle, of finishing what was started. Please, Mr. Holmes, stop him. Holmes and Watson left Ashburn, their resolve hardened. The stone circle loomed in the distance, its ancient stones glistening with frost under the moonlight. Holmes clutched the sample of the compound, his mind racing through the evidence, the footprints, the maid's death, the well, the journal. Grimshaw is no mere chemist, he said. He's a fanatic, driven by a centuries-old vendetta, but he's made a mistake. This compound is his weakness, and I shall use it against him. They reached the village again, tracking Grimshaw's trail to a derelict barn on the outskirts. Inside, they found evidence of his work, more vials, a makeshift laboratory, and a map marking the stone circle. A sudden noise, a clatter of glass, alerted them to Grimshaw's presence. They crept forward, finding him hunched over a device, a complex array of tubes and burners, the air around it shimmering with cold. Grimshaw, Holmes called, stepping into the light. Your scheme ends here. Grimshaw whirled, his eyes wild. You're too late, Holmes. The spire will be mine, and the Ashburns will pay for their treachery. He lunged for the device, but Holmes was faster, knocking it to the ground. The compound spilled, freezing the floor in an instant. Watson tackled Grimshaw, pinning him as Holmes secured the remaining vials. You've underestimated me, Grimshaw, Holmes said. Your demon is nothing but chemistry, and I've unraveled its secret. Grimshaw struggled, his voice a snarl. You know nothing of the spire's power. The circle, the relics, they're more than you can comprehend. Holmes ignored him, examining the device. A delivery system for the compound, he said. To Watson, he planned to unleash it on a grand scale, likely at the stone circle. But we've stopped him for now. They bound Grimshaw, intending to deliver him to the authorities, but a sudden explosion of frost erupted from the device, forcing them to flee the barn. In the chaos, Grimshaw slipped free, vanishing into the night. Holmes cursed under his breath, but his eyes gleamed with determination. He's escaped, but we have his compound, Holmes said, holding up the vials. And we know his target, the stone circle, Watson. That's where this ends. The chapter closed with the manor looming behind them, its frost thicker than ever. As Holmes and Watson prepared for the final confrontation, the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the moors, and somewhere in the mist, Grimshaw plotted his next move, the demon's shadow still lurking in the spire's ancient heart. Chapter 6. The Betrayer's Blade. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly before the Frosted Spire, a desolate expanse of heather and peat, cloaked in a mist that seemed to pulse with secrets. Sherlock Holmes stood at the edge of the manor's frost-rimed lawn, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon where the fog thickened, obscuring the jagged outlines of distant hills. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, almost metallic, that lingered like a warning. Beside him, Dr. John Watson adjusted his scarf against the biting chill, his breath visible in the midsummer air. That should have been warm, but felt like winter's grip. Holmes's gloved hand clutched the ancient journal they had found in Lord Ashburn's study, its leather cover worn and its pages brittle with age. The cryptic entries, written in a spidery hand, had consumed his attention since the previous night's discoveries. The journal spoke of a betrayal centuries old, a tale of blood and ambition tied to the very stones of the Frosted Spire. Holmes's mind, a machine of relentless precision, churned through the fragments of history, piecing together a puzzle that grew more intricate with each revelation. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but cutting through the stillness. "The journal's latest passage confirms my suspicions. The demon of the spire is no supernatural entity, but a shadow cast by human treachery. We must delve deeper into this tale of Sir Cedric and his brother. The truth lies buried, but not so deep that we cannot unearth it." Watson nodded, though his face betrayed a flicker of unease. The manor's oppressive atmosphere, with its creaking timbers and frost-glazed windows, had begun to wear on him. "You're certain this is no ghost, Holmes?" "The servants' tales, the vicar's legend, they all speak of a vengeful spirit. And those footprints we found, they vanished into thin air." Holmes's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. "Ghosts do not leave chemical residues, my dear Watson. The crystalline substance I collected near those footprints is no ectoplasmic residue, but a compound of deliberate design. Our demon is a fabrication, and its architect is very much alive. Come, we have work to do." They returned to the manor, its towering silhouette looming against the gray sky. The great hall was dimly lit, its chandeliers casting feeble light on the portraits of Ashburn ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the two men as they crossed the room. Holmes led the way to the library, where the secret passage Watson had discovered the previous night awaited. The passage, hidden behind a panel of oak carved with intricate vines, had led them to a crypt beneath the manor, a vault of stone and shadow that held relics older than the house itself. The crypt's air was colder than the moors above, a dry, piercing chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Holmes carried a lantern, its flame flickering as he examined the relics they had found, a rusted gauntlet, a cracked chalice, and a series of stone tablets inscribed with symbols that matched those in the journal. Watson, ever the practical man, had brought a notebook to sketch the symbols, his pencil scratching softly in the silence. "These markings," Holmes said, crouching beside a tablet, "are not mere decoration. They form a cipher, a rudimentary one, but deliberate. The journal mentions Sir Cedric, a knight of the 14th century, betrayed by his brother, Sir Baldwin, for control of these lands. The curse, as the locals call it, stems from that act of fratricide. But curses are stories, Watson, and stories are written by men." Watson frowned, his sketch half finished. "You think this Baldwin's descendants are behind the current trouble? That Dr. Grimshaw, the chemist we tracked to the village, is connected to this ancient feud?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming in the lantern's glow. "Grimshaw's presence here is no coincidence. His knowledge of chemistry, his secrecy, and his proximity to the spire all point to a man with a purpose. The freezing compound we found, capable of inducing rapid frost, is his weapon. He uses the legend of the demon to mask his actions, to instill fear and drive Lord Ashbourne from his ancestral home." Watson set down his pencil, his expression grim. "But why? What does Grimshaw gain by terrorizing the manor? Land? Revenge? And how does he make those footprints vanish?" Holmes stood, brushing dust from his coat. "The footprints are a trick. Watson likely achieved with a volatile compound that sublimates quickly, leaving no trace. As for Grimshaw's motive, the journal suggests a lineage of grievance. If he is a descendant of Baldwin, he may believe the spire was stolen from his family. Revenge and greed are powerful motivators, and the spire's lands are rich with untapped resources. But we need more than theories. We need evidence. They spent the morning in the crypt, cataloging the relics and cross-referencing the journals. Entries. Holmes's mind worked like a scalpel, cutting through the layers of myth to reveal the bones of truth. The symbols on the tablets, he deduced, were a variation of an old alchemical code used by medieval scholars to conceal knowledge from the uninitiated. The journal's author, likely an Ashburn ancestor, had recorded the betrayal encoded. Fragments, perhaps to protect the family from further treachery. By midday, Watson's patience began to fray. The crypt's oppressive atmosphere, combined with the manor's endless mysteries, weighed heavily on him. Holmes, we've been at this for hours. These relics, this journal, they're centuries old. How do we connect them to Grimshaw? He's a modern man, a scientist, not some medieval sorcerer. Holmes's eyes narrowed, a spark of insight flaring. Time, Watson, is merely a canvas. Men repeat the sins of their forebears, cloaked in new guises. Grimshaw's science is sorcery, and the spire is his battlefield. We must return to the manor and search Lord Ashburn's laboratory again. There may be more clues hidden among his experiments. They emerged from the crypt into the library, where the air was marginally warmer but no less heavy with secrets. The laboratory, concealed behind a false wall in Lord Ashburn's study, was a cluttered space of glass vials, burners, and alchemical texts that seemed to straddle the line between science and mysticism. Holmes moved with purpose, examining the shelves where Ashburn had conducted his secretive experiments. The crystalline substance, which Holmes had identified as a rare compound capable of inducing rapid freezing, was stored in a locked case. Its contents glinting like shards of ice. As Holmes picked the lock with a deft hand, Watson kept watch at the door, his revolver at the ready. The manor's servants, though loyal to Ashburn, were nervous, their whispers of the demon growing louder with each passing day. Watson's instincts, honed by years of military service, told him danger was near, though he could not pinpoint its source. "Holmes," he whispered, "do you hear that?" A scratching like something moving in the walls. Holmes paused, his head tilted. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a rhythmic scrape, as if claws were dragging against wood. The manor's secrets are restless, Watson. Stay alert. They worked quickly, Holmes cataloging the laboratory's contents while Watson stood guard. Among the vials, Holmes found a notebook filled with Ashburn's meticulous handwriting, detailing his attempts to replicate the freezing compound. The notes were incomplete, riddled with errors, but they confirmed Ashburn's fear of an external threat, someone who knew the compound's formula and wielded it with malicious intent. "Grimshaw," Holmes muttered, his voice laced with certainty. Ashburn was trying to counter him, to understand the weapon being used against his home, but he was outmatched. Before Watson could respond, the scratching grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that seemed to rise from the floor. Itself, the temperature in the room plummeted, frost creeping across the windows despite the summer sun outside. Watson's grip tightened on his revolver, his heart pounding. "Holmes, it's happening again." The demon, "There is no demon," Holmes snapped, though his eyes darted to the shadows. "This is a calculated effect, a chemical reaction, triggered to frighten us. Stay calm, Watson, and follow me." They traced the sound to the library, where the secret passage to the crypt stood ajar. Holmes's lantern revealed fresh marks on the passage's walls gouges, as if made by a blade. At the passage's end, in the crypt, they found their prize, a dagger, its blade etched with the same symbols as the relics, half buried in the dirt floor. Holmes knelt, examining it with reverence. The blade was ancient, its steel pitted, but still sharp, the symbols glowing faintly in the lantern's light. "This," Holmes said, holding the dagger aloft, "is the betrayer's blade. Sir Baldwin's weapon, used to slay his brother, Sir Cedric. Its presence here is no accident. Grimshaw, or someone acting on his behalf, has been in this crypt." Watson's eyes widened. "You think Grimshaw planted it to fuel the legend, or to reclaim it?" Holmes replied. "This dagger is a symbol of his lineage's claim to the spire. Its discovery strengthens the narrative. He's weaving a narrative of rightful ownership justified by blood." Their investigation was cut short by a sudden shout from above, followed by the clatter of boots on stone. Holmes pocketed the dagger, and they hurried back to the manor's main floor, where a servant stood trembling, his face pale. "Sirs, out on the moormen, armed men. They're coming this way." Holmes's expression hardened. "Grimshaw's thugs, no doubt. Watson, arm yourself. We're about to face the human face of our demon." They rushed to the manor's entrance, where the mist had thickened into a near impenetrable fog. Through it, shapes moved 5 men, their faces obscured by scarves, carrying rifles and knives. Watson's military instincts kicked in, and he took cover behind a stone pillar, his revolver trained on the approaching figures. Holmes, ever the strategist, scanned the terrain, noting the uneven ground and the nearby stone circle as potential advantages. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "aim for their legs. We need them alive for questioning." The ambush was swift and brutal. The thugs charged, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Watson fired, his shots precise, bringing down 2 men with cries of pain. Holmes, unarmed but agile, used the fog to his advantage, slipping between attackers to disarm them with swift, calculated strikes. One thug lunged at him with a knife, but Holmes sidestepped, twisting the man's arm until the blade clattered to the ground. Within minutes, the skirmish was over. 3 of the thugs lay wounded, groaning in the frost, while 2 had fled into the moor. Holmes bound the captives with rope from the manor stables, his face a mask of determination. "These are hired men, Watson. Mercenaries likely paid by Grimshaw to intimidate Ashburn's household. Their presence confirms our enemy's desperation." Watson, breathing heavily, wiped sweat from his brow. "Desperation?" "Holmes, they nearly had us. If Grimshaw's willing to send armed men, what's next?" Holmes's gaze turned to the horizon, where the fog seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural light. "Next, Watson, we confront the source. Grimshaw is close, I can feel it, but he's not alone. That light, it's coming from the spire's tallest tower, just as it did last night." They returned to the manor, the captives in tow, and handed them to the servants for safekeeping. Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the final threads of the puzzle. The dagger, the journal, the freezing compound, all pointed to a man driven by a centuries-old grudge. wielding science as a weapon to reclaim what he believed was his. But the spectral figure Watson had glimpsed, watching from afar, lingered in Holmes's thoughts. Was it Grimshaw himself or another player in this deadly game? As night fell, the manor grew quieter, the frost thickening on its walls. Holmes sat by the library's fire, the dagger and journal before him, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. Watson, bandaging a minor cut from the skirmish, watched his friend with a mix of admiration and concern. "Holmes," he said, "we've faced danger before, but this feels different. The spire, the frost, that figure in the fog, it's as if the past itself is fighting us." Holmes's eyes gleamed, his voice steady. "The past is a shadow, Watson, cast by the present. Grimshaw believes he can wield it, but he underestimates. U.S. Tomorrow we hunt him down. The betrayer's blade has pointed the way, and I intend to follow it to the end." The chapter closed with the distant howl of the wind, carrying the faint echo of a spectral figure's laughter, watching from the moors as the frosted spire stood silent, its secrets poised to unravel under Sherlock Holmes's relentless logic. Chapter 7. The Demon's Mask. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly before Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, a desolate expanse of heather and shadow, cloaked in the pale light of a waxing moon. The frosted spire loomed behind them, its jagged silhouette cutting into the night sky like a blade. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint, acrid tang of the mysterious crystalline substance Holmes had pocketed days earlier. The manor's frost had deepened, creeping up the stone walls as if the building itself were succumbing to some unnatural winter. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, his mind racing with the threads of the case, the cryptic journal, the betrayed knight, the chilling compound, and the elusive Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw, whose shadow seemed to lurk behind every spectral rumor. Watson, bundled in his greatcoat, shivered as a gust swept across the moor. "Holmes," he said, his voice low, "this place feels more cursed by the hour." "That scream last night, surely." "It wasn't human?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "My dear Watson, the human mind is far more inventive than any ghost. That scream was no demon's wail, but a calculated act. Our quarry is cunning, and we are closing in." They had spent the day poring over the journal's latest decoded passages, which hinted at a final ritual site tied to the stone circle. The map Holmes had found in the crypt, a tattered parchment etched with symbols, matching those on the relics, pointed to an abandoned mill a mile from the spire. Grimshaw, Holmes deduced, was no mere chemist, but a man driven by a centuries-old vendetta, wielding science as his weapon and fear as his mask. The demon was no supernatural entity, but a fabrication, a terror crafted to drive the Ashburn family from their ancestral home. Tonight, Holmes intended to unmask him. The mill came into view, a crumbling structure of weathered stone and rotting wood, its wheel long stilled by the sluggish stream beside it. The windows were dark, save for a faint flickering glow from within, like the pulse of a dying star. Holmes motioned for Watson to stay low as they approached, his long fingers brushing the revolver in his coat pocket. Watson, ever the soldier, gripped his own weapon, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. "Stay sharp, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Grimshaw is no fool. He'll have prepared for intruders." They crept toward the mill, the frost crunching beneath their boots. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Holmes paused, his senses attuned to every sound, The drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a night bird. He pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous interior lit by a single lantern swinging from a rafter. The air was thick, with the scent of chemicals sharp and biting. Sacks of grain lay rotting in corners, and rusted machinery loomed like skeletal sentinels. At the center of the room stood a makeshift laboratory, glass vials, burners, and a large metal apparatus humming faintly, its surface dusted with the same crystalline substance Holmes had analyzed. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, stepping forward. "A portable freezing device, likely powered by a volatile reaction. This is the heart of Grimshaw's scheme." Watson's eyes darted to the shadows. "Where is he, Holmes? This feels too quiet." Before Holmes could reply, a metallic clank echoed from above. Instinctively, he shoved Watson aside as a heavy iron grate crashed to the floor where they'd stood. Dust billowed, and Watson coughed, scrambling to his feet. Holmes's eyes narrowed, scanning the rafters. A figure moved in the darkness, a cloaked silhouette, swift and silent. "Grimshaw!" Holmes called, his voice cutting through the silence. "Your theatrics are tiresome. Show yourself." A low, mocking laugh answered, reverberating off the stone walls. "You're persistent, Mr. Holmes," came a voice, smooth and cold. "But you're meddling in forces beyond your logic." The figure descended a rickety ladder, landing lightly on the floor. Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw was tall and gaunt, his face half hidden by the hood of his cloak, but his eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity. In one hand he held a glass vial filled with a shimmering liquid, its surface catching the lantern's light like a prism. Holmes recognized it instantly, the freezing compound, concentrated and deadly. Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not yet, Watson. He wants us to act rashly." Grimshaw tilted his head, a smile curling his lips. "Wise, Mr. Holmes. You've unraveled much, but not all. The spire belongs to my bloodline, stolen by the Ashbournes centuries ago. I am merely reclaiming what is mine." Holmes's voice was steady, almost conversational. "By terrorizing innocents and wielding a chemical toy, your ancestors' betrayal does not justify murder." Grimshaw's smile faltered, his grip tightening on the vial. "You know nothing of betrayal. Sir Cedric was butchered by his own kin, his legacy buried in that cursed crypt. This compound," he gestured to the apparatus behind him, "is my justice. It will freeze the spire and all its lies into oblivion." Holmes took a step forward, his eyes locked on Grimshaw's. "A fascinating compound, I'll grant you. A derivative of ammonium nitrate, perhaps, with a catalyst to accelerate freezing, but your delivery mechanism is flawed. The vapor disperses too quickly in open air. You'd need a confined space to achieve your catastrophe." Grimshaw's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise betraying his composure. "You've studied it, have you? No matter. This mill is my testing ground, and you've walked into my trap." As if on cue, a hissing sound filled the air. Watson spun, spotting a small device on the laboratory table, its nozzle releasing a fine mist. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the table's edge. Holmes's mind raced heat. Seeing the compound's effects in the maid's locked room, the unnatural ice encasing her body. If the mist spread, they'd be frozen solid within minutes. "Watson, the burner!" Holmes shouted, lunging for the table. He seized a lit burner and hurled it at the device, igniting the mist in a brief flare of blue flame. The hissing stopped, but the air grew colder, the frost creeping up their boots. Watson fired a shot at the rafters, hoping to distract Grimshaw, but the chemist was already moving, darting toward a side door. After him, Holmes barked, vaulting over the fallen grate. Watson followed, his breath visible in the frigid air. They burst into the night, the moor stretching before them, vast and unforgiving. Grimshaw was a shadow in the distance, his cloak billowing as he ran toward the stone circle. The chase was relentless, the uneven ground threatening to trip them at every step. Holmes's long strides ate up the distance, his mind calculating Grimshaw's likely path. The stone circle was no random choice, it was the ritual site from the journal, the place where Grimshaw planned to unleash his final act. The full moon was 2 nights away, and Holmes suspected the chemist intended to use the circle's symbolic power to amplify his scheme, whether through science or superstition. They reached the circle, its ancient stones looming like silent judges. Grimshaw stood at its center, another vial in hand, chanting softly in that distorted Old English dialect Holmes had identified. The air shimmered with cold, the frost thickening on the stones. Watson aimed his revolver, but Holmes signaled him to wait. "Grimshaw," Holmes said, his voice calm but commanding, "your ritual is a farce. The compound's volatility requires precise conditions, not incantations. You're no alchemist, you're a fraud." Grimshaw's chant faltered, his eyes blazing with fury. "You mock what you don't understand, Holmes. The Spire's curse is real, and I am its reckoning." He hurled the vial at the ground, shattering it. A cloud of crystalline mist erupted, the temperature dropping so sharply that Watson gasped, his fingers numbing on the revolver. Holmes, however, was prepared. From his coat, he produced a small flask, a counteragent he'd synthesized in the Manners laboratory based on his analysis of the compound. He flung it into the mist, and a chemical hiss followed as the agents reacted, neutralizing the freeze. The mist dissipated, leaving only a thin layer of frost on the grass. Grimshaw roared in frustration, drawing a dagger from his cloak, the same etched blade Watson had found in the crypt. He lunged at Holmes, but Watson was faster, tackling the chemist to the ground. The dagger skittered across the stones, and Holmes pinned Grimshaw's arms, his strength surprising for his lean frame. "It's over, Grimshaw," Holmes said, his voice cold as the moor. "Your demon is nothing but chemistry and lies." Grimshaw struggled, his face contorted with rage. "You can't stop it, Holmes. The spire will fall." Watson bound Grimshaw's wrists with a length of cord from his pocket, his hand steady despite the chill. Holmes retrieved the dagger, examining its etched symbols under the moonlight. "These markings," he said, almost to himself, "are a cipher, not a curse. Your ancestors' betrayal was recorded, not avenged." As they dragged Grimshaw back to the mill, Holmes's mind was already piecing together the final threads. The map in the crypt had revealed the circle as the ritual site, but it also marked a hidden cache near the mill, likely where Grimshaw stored his remaining compound. Holmes instructed Watson to guard Grimshaw while he searched the mill's cellar. There, beneath a pile of rotting sacks, he found a locked chest. Using a hairpin from his pocket, he picked the lock with practiced ease, revealing vials of the freezing compound, carefully sealed, and a notebook detailing Grimshaw's experiments. The notebook was a treasure trove, chemical formulas, trial logs, and a manifesto of sorts. outlining Grimshaw's obsession with reclaiming the spire. He believed the Ashburns had stolen his family's legacy, and the demon was his means of terrorizing them into ruin. The compound, a brilliant but unstable invention, was his weapon. Its freezing effect, amplified by a catalyst Holmes had yet to fully identify. Returning to Watson, Holmes found Grimshaw sullen but defiant. "You've won nothing," the chemist spat. "The spire's secrets will outlast you." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Secrets, perhaps, but not your delusions. The spire will stand, and your compound will be studied, not weaponized." They secured Grimshaw in the mill, barricading the door until morning, when they could summon the local constabulary. The frost on the manor's walls seemed to recede slightly, as if the spire itself sensed the threat waning. Holmes, however, was not satisfied. The journal had mentioned a final ritual, and the full moon loomed. Grimshaw's capture was a victory, but the map's markings suggested one last piece of the puzzle, a site where the demon would be fully unleashed as dawn broke, painting the moors in hues of gold and gray. Holmes stood outside the mill, the map in hand. "Watson," he said, his voice low, "we have one night before the full moon." Grimshaw's ritual was no mere performance. "There's a device, a larger one, hidden somewhere near the circle. We must find it before it's too late." Watson nodded, his face grim but determined. "What's his endgame, Holmes? Destroy the spire entirely?" Holmes's eyes narrowed, fixed on the distant stones. "Not just the spire. Grimshaw wants to bury the truth, his family's shame, the Ashburns' legacy, all of it. The compound could freeze the manor and the surrounding moor, rendering it uninhabitable. A dramatic gesture, but flawed. We'll stop it." They returned to the spire, where the servants were in a state of cautious relief. Lord Ashburn, pale and haggard, met them in the great hall. "Mr. Holmes, have you ended this nightmare?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Not yet," Holmes replied. "But we are close. Keep your people inside tomorrow night. The full moon will bring answers." As they prepared for the final confrontation, Holmes pored over the map and notebook, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. The device, he theorized, was likely buried near the circle, rigged to release a massive dose of the compound. Its activation would require precise timing, likely tied to the moon's zenith. Watson, meanwhile, rallied the servants, ensuring the manor was fortified against any further sabotage. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Holmes synthesized more of the counteragent, using the manor's laboratory to refine his formula. Watson scouted the moors, marking potential hiding spots for the device. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the promise of resolution or disaster. That night, as the moon rose, full and luminous, Holmes and Watson returned to the stone circle. The frost was thicker now, coating the stones in a glittering sheen. Holmes's lantern cast long shadows, and Watson's revolver gleamed in the moonlight. They searched the circle's perimeter, Holmes's keen eyes spotting a patch of disturbed earth near the largest stone. Digging with their hands, they uncovered a metal box, its surface etched with the same symbols as the dagger. Holmes opened it carefully, revealing a complex device, a network of tubes and vials wired to a clockwork timer. The freezing compound glowed faintly within, ready to be unleashed. "Ingenious," Holmes muttered, "but reckless. One spark could destabilize it." Watson's brow furrowed. "Can you disarm it?" Holmes nodded, his fingers already at work. The timer is set for midnight. We have minutes. With surgical precision, Holmes disconnected the vials, neutralizing the compound with his counteragent. The device hissed, then fell silent, its thread extinguished. Watson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Is that it? Holmes, is it over?" Holmes stood, brushing dirt from his coat. "For now, Watson. Grimshaw is finished, but the Spire's secrets linger. We'll deliver him to the authorities and the compound to safer hands." As they walked back to the TV Manor, the frost began to melt, the moors warming under the moon's gaze. The spire stood tall, its silhouette softened by the dawn's approach. Holmes's mind, however, was already turning to the next mystery, the next challenge. For now, the demon was unmasked, its terror reduced to science and greed. But in the shadows of the moor, Holmes knew, other secrets waited. Chapter 8. The Circle of Frost. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly under the pale glow of the rising full moon, its light casting long shadows across the frost-rimed heath. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson trudged through the biting cold, their breaths puffing in clouds that vanished into the night. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, almost metallic, that Holmes had come to associate with the strange crystalline compound at the heart of this mystery. The Frosted Spire loomed in the distance, its jagged silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky, as if the manor itself were a sentinel guarding secrets older than the stones it was built upon. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, his mind racing through the deductions that had brought them to this moment. The map they had recovered from Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw's lair in the abandoned mill had been explicit. A ritual site at the ancient stone circle, marked with coordinates that aligned perfectly with the full moon's zenith. The coded journal, the relics in the crypt, and the freezing compound all pointed to this night as the culmination of Grimshaw's scheme. Holmes's gloved hand tightened around the small vial of counteragent he had synthesized in Lord Ashbourne's hidden laboratory, a concoction of ammonia and sodium chloride designed to neutralize the rapid freezing properties of Grimshaw's compound. It was a gamble, but Holmes had calculated the chemical interactions with precision. Failure was not an option. Watson, bundled in his greatcoat, glanced at Holmes, his face etched with concern. "This feels like a trap, Holmes. Grimshaw's been one step ahead of us before. What's to say he isn't waiting out there with more of those hired brutes?" Holmes's lips curved into a thin smile, his eyes never leaving the path ahead. "He may well be, Watson, but his advantage lies in secrecy, and that has been stripped from him. The map, the journal, the compound, each piece of evidence betrays his intent. He seeks to unleash a catastrophic freeze, likely to destroy the spire and bury its secrets under a shroud of ice. But he underestimates us. Tonight we end this." The stone circle came into view as they crested a low hill, its weathered monoliths standing like silent giants in a clearing ringed by gnarled oaks. The frost was thicker here, crunching underfoot, and the air carried an unnatural chill that seeped through their clothing. Holmes paused, crouching to examine the ground. His fingers brushed over a faint trail of the crystalline substance, glittering faintly in the moonlight. "Recent," he murmured. "Grimshaw has been here within the hour." Watson drew his revolver, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Then we're not too late. But what's his game? A ritual to awaken the demon? "It's madness." "Not madness, Watson," Holmes replied, standing and brushing frost from his gloves. "A performance. The demon is a fabrication, a terror to drive the superstitious away from the spire while Grimshaw pursues his true aim, control of the estate, perhaps even the region, by leveraging the fear of a curse. The freezing compound is his weapon. And this ritual is his stage. Come, we must move quickly." They approached the circle cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the oaks. The monoliths were ancient, their surfaces etched with runes that matched the symbols in the Ashburn journal. Holmes's mind flickered to the decoded passages. A 14th century betrayal, a knight's blood spilled to secure power, a curse woven from greed. Grimshaw, a descendant of the betrayer, had twisted the legend to his own ends, using science to masquerade as the supernatural. The irony was not lost on Holmes' superstition and chemistry, intertwined in a dance of deception. "Ah!" Low chant broke the silence, guttural and rhythmic, rising from the center of the circle. Holmes signaled for Watson to stay low, and they crept closer, peering through a gap between two stones. There, bathed in moonlight, stood Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw, his tall, gaunt frame draped in a black cloak that billowed in the rising wind. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but his eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity as he stood before a makeshift altar, a flat stone slab, covered with vials of the crystalline compound, their contents shimmering like liquid diamonds. A strange apparatus, a cross between a chemist's retort and a mechanical sprayer, sat beside the altar, its metal gleaming dully. Thin tubes ran from the device to the ground, disappearing into the frost. Holmes's gaze narrowed. "A dispersal mechanism," he whispered. "He intends to aerosolize the compound, spreading it across the spire and beyond. The frost we've seen is but a precursor. This could encase the entire estate in ice within minutes." Watson's grip tightened on his revolver. "Can your counteragent stop it?" "It must," Holmes said, his voice steady but urgent. "The compound reacts exothermically with moisture in the air, triggering rapid crystallization. My solution disrupts that reaction, but we must act before he activates the device." Grimshaw's chanting grew louder, the words a distorted echo of Old English. Laced with fragments of Latin, Holmes recognized the cadence from the journal, a ritual meant to invoke the demon, but in truth, a theatrical flourish to mask the science. Around the circle, the frost thickened, creeping up the stones as if alive. The temperature plummeted, and Watson shivered, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "We can't wait, Holmes," Watson urged. "He's starting it." Holmes nodded, his mind calculating angles and risks. "Flank him from the left. I'll approach from the right. If he activates the device, aim for the tubes. They're the delivery system. But be cautious. The compound is volatile." They split, moving silently through the shadows. Holmes's heart beat steadily, his senses attuned to every sound, the crunch of frost, the rustle of Grimshaw's cloak, the faint hum of the apparatus warming up. As he neared the altar, he saw Grimshaw raise a vial, its contents glowing faintly. As he poured it into the device, the hum grew louder, and a faint mist began to rise from the tubes, curling into the air like spectral fingers. "Now, Watson," Holmes shouted, breaking cover. Grimshaw spun, his eyes wide with fury. "You," he snarled, his hand darting to a concealed pocket. Before he could draw a weapon, Watson fired a warning shot, the crack echoing through the circle. The bullet struck the ground near Grimshaw's feet, sending up a puff of frost. "Stand down, Grimshaw," Holmes commanded, stepping into the moonlight with the vial of counteragent in hand. "Your scheme is finished. The demon is nothing but chemistry, and I have the means to undo it." Grimshaw's lips twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won, Holmes? This is bigger than the Spire. My family's birthright was stolen, and I will reclaim it, even if I must bury this cursed place in ice." He lunged for the device, flipping a switch. The apparatus roared to life, the mist thickening into a swirling cloud that spread rapidly, frosting everything it touched. The stones glistened with ice, and Watson staggered as the cold bit into his skin. Holmes acted swiftly, uncorking the vial and hurling it into the heart of the device. The counteragent splashed across the tubes, hissing as it reacted with the counteragent splashed across the tubes, hissing as it reacted with the tensioner. Compound. The mist faltered, then dissipated, the frost retreating as the chemical reaction collapsed. Grimshaw screamed in rage, drawing a dagger from his cloak, its blade etched with the same runes as the relics in the crypt. He charged at Holmes, but Watson was faster, tackling Grimshaw to the ground. The dagger skittered across the frost, and Holmes pinned Grimshaw's arms, securing him with a length of cord from his pocket. "It's over," Holmes said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Your compound is neutralized, your ritual exposed. The Spire will stand, and your revenge is nothing but a footnote." Grimshaw struggled, his eyes blazing. "You don't understand, Holmes. The Spire's secrets go deeper than you know." The frost was only the beginning. Holmes silenced him with a sharp glance. "Save your tales for the constabulary. Watson, secure the device. We'll need it as evidence." Watson nodded, gingerly disconnecting the tubes and sealing the remaining vials of compound. The frost around the circle began to melt, the unnatural chill lifting as the moon reached its zenith. The oaks rustled in the warming breeze, and the spire in the distance seemed to stand taller, as if relieved of a centuries-old burden. As they bound Grimshaw and prepared to escort him back to the manor, Holmes paused, his eyes drawn to the altar. A small leather-bound book lay among the vials, its pages yellowed with age. He picked it up, flipping through it to find more of the coded script from the Ashburn journal. "This may hold the final pieces," he murmured. "Grimshaw's motives, his resources, perhaps even his accomplices." Watson glanced at the book, then at the defeated chemist. "Do you think there's more to this, Holmes?" He spoke of deeper secrets. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of curiosity. "There is always more, Watson. But for now, we have thwarted a catastrophe. The Spire is safe, and Grimshaw will face justice. Let us return to Lord Ashburn and put an end to this demon once and for all." They marched Grimshaw back through the moors, the frost melting under their boots, the manor growing closer with each step. The moon cast its light over the landscape, illuminating a path free of shadows. Holmes's mind, however, was already turning to the book in his pocket, its secrets whispering of new mysteries yet to be unraveled. The return to the Frosted Spire was quiet, save for Grimshaw's occasional mutterings, which Holmes ignored. The manor's staff greeted them with a mix of relief and awe, and Lord Ashburn himself met them at the door, his face pale but resolute. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice trembling. Holmes nodded. "The threat is neutralized, and the perpetrator is in custody. Your manor is safe, Lord Ashburn, though I suggest a thorough investigation of your family's records. There may be more to this curse than even you know." Ashburn bowed his head, gratitude etched in his features. "I owe you everything, Mr. Holmes, and you, Dr. Watson. The spire will stand as a testament to your courage." Watson smiled wearily. "Just doing our duty, my lord. Though I'll be glad to see a warm fire and a hot meal." Holmes allowed himself a rare chuckle. "Indeed, Watson. But first, we must ensure Grimshaw is secured and the evidence preserved. The night is not yet over." As the servants led Grimshaw to a locked room to await the authorities, Holmes and Watson settled by the manor's hearth, the crackling fire a stark contrast to the icy ordeal they had just endured. Holmes opened the leather-bound book, his fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. "This," he said softly, "may lead us to the true heart of the spire's secrets. But that is a case for another day." Watson leaned back, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with admiration. "You never stop, do you, Holmes?" Holmes's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Not while there are puzzles to solve, my dear Watson. Not while there are puzzles." The firelight danced across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the spire's past. Outside, the moors lay quiet, the frost gone, the demon vanquished, not by magic, but by the relentless light of reason. Chapter 9. The Ashburn Legacy. Morning sun broke over the Yorkshire moors, casting a golden glow across the frosted spire, which now stood free of its icy shroud. The manor, once a grim silhouette against the misty horizon, seemed to breathe anew, its stone walls warmed by the light. Sherlock Holmes stood at the edge of the manor's sprawling lawn, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape as if to confirm the last traces of frost had truly vanished. Dr. John Watson, ever his steadfast companion, stood beside him, his notebook tucked under his arm, a faint smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the scene. "Remarkable." "Holmes," Watson said, his voice tinged with relief. "To think, just days ago, this place was a frozen tomb. Now it's as if the curse never existed." Holmes's lips twitched into a wry smile. "Curse, Watson? You know better than to indulge such fancies. What we faced was no demon, but the machinations of a man driven by greed and vengeance. The frost was merely a symptom of human ambition gone awry." Watson nodded, though his eyes lingered on the manor's towers, as if half expecting the spectral figure of Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw to reappear. The events of the past days had left an indelible mark on him, the chilling screams and unnatural ice etched into his memory. Yet, with Grimshaw now in custody, bound for the authorities in York, the weight of the mystery seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Their work at the spire was nearly done, but one task remained: to tie up the loose ends of the case and ensure the manor's future was secure. Holmes, ever methodical, had already begun piecing together the final threads of the puzzle. He turned toward the manor's entrance, his long coat flapping in the gentle breeze, and beckoned Watson to follow. "Come, Watson, we have a final reckoning with Lord Ashburn. There are truths he must face, and I intend to see this matter through to its conclusion." Inside the manor, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The servants, once cowed by fear of the demon, moved with renewed purpose, polishing banisters and airing out rooms long sealed by dread. The great hall, where Holmes and Watson had first met Lord Ashburn, was now bathed in sunlight streaming through tall windows, the heavy drapes thrown open. Ashburn himself stood by the fireplace, his gaunt frame less hunched than before, though his eyes still carried the weight of a man who had seen too much. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," Ashburn greeted, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I owe you both a debt I can scarcely repay. The spire is free, and yet I feel I must know the full truth. What drove Grimshaw to such lengths, and what part did I play in this calamity?" Holmes settled into a high-backed chair, his fingers steepled before him. "Lord Ashburn, the truth is often a bitter draught, but it is necessary. Let us begin with Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw, a man whose intellect was matched only by his obsession. His actions were not those of a madman, but of one consumed by a perceived injustice stretching back centuries." Watson took a seat, his notebook open, ready to record the final unraveling of the case. Holmes's voice, calm and precise, filled the room as he began to recount the interrogation of Grimshaw, conducted in the Manor's makeshift holding cell. The previous night, the cell, a damp stone chamber in the Manor's undercroft, had been a stark contrast to the opulence above. Grimshaw, his wrists bound and his once impeccable coat torn, sat defiant, his dark eyes glaring at Holmes. The chemist's face was a mask of bitterness, but Holmes, undeterred, had leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Dr. Grimshaw," Holmes had begun, "your scheme was ingenious, but flawed. The freezing compound, the spectral guise, the ritual at the stone circle, all designed to terrorize Lord Ashburn and seize the spire. But why? What drives a man of your intellect to such theatrical extremes?" Grimshaw's lips curled into a sneer. "You think—" "You've unraveled it all, Holmes. The spire was stolen from my family centuries ago. Sir Cedric, the true heir, was betrayed by his own brother, murdered for this land. I am his descendant, and I came to reclaim what is mine." Holmes raised an eyebrow, his expression unyielding. "A compelling tale, but let us dispense with romanticized history. You discovered records of this supposed betrayal in obscure manuscripts, did you not? And, finding yourself disgraced and destitute after your chemical experiments failed in London, you saw an opportunity to exploit the legend of the Frosted Spire's curse." Grimshaw's defiance faltered, his shoulders slumping slightly. "The compound was my creation," he admitted, his voice low. "A marvel of chemistry, capable of freezing anything in seconds. I meant to use it to drive Ashburn out, to make him believe the curse was real. The manor would be mine, and with it, the wealth and power owed to my bloodline." Holmes leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "And the maid? Her death was no accident, was it?" Grimshaw's jaw tightened. "A miscalculation. The compound was unstable, and she was in the wrong place. I never meant for anyone to die." Watson, standing by the door, had clenched his fists at this, his doctor's heart recoiling at the callousness. Holmes, however, remained impassive, his mind already dissecting the next piece of the puzzle. "You used the stone circle as a stage," Holmes continued. "The chance, the cloaked figure, all part of your charade to amplify fear. But you underestimated the resilience of those you sought to manipulate. And you underestimated me." Grimshaw's eyes flashed with anger, but he said no more. Holmes rose, signaling to the local constable, who had arrived to take Grimshaw into custody. As the chemist was led away, Holmes turned to Watson, his expression one of quiet triumph. "The man's motives are clear, Watson. he had said. Greed cloaked an ancestral grievance. But we must now address Lord Ashburn's role in this affair. Back in the Great Hall, Lord Ashburn listened intently as Holmes recounted the interrogation. His face paled at the mention of the maid's death, and he sank into a chair, his hands trembling. I never imagined my own experiments would contribute to such horror, Ashbourne said, his voice barely above a whisper. You must understand, Mr. Holmes, my work in the laboratory was born of desperation. The Ashburn name has been tarnished by this curse for generations. I sought to disprove it, to find a scientific explanation for the frost that plagued the spire. I dabbled in chemistry, yes, but I swear I knew nothing of Grimshaw's compound. Holmes's gaze was piercing, but not unkind. Your experiments, Lord Ashburn, were reckless but not malicious. You sought to restore your family's honor, but in doing so, you provided Grimshaw with the perfect opportunity. Your laboratory, your journals, they inspired his scheme, though you could not have foreseen his intent. Ashburn bowed his head, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. What must I do now? The spire is safe, but at what cost? The servants fear me. The village whispers of my failure. How can I redeem this place? Watson, ever the compassionate soul, spoke up. Lord Ashburn, you have a chance to make amends. The manor is yours, free of frost and fear. Use it for good. Turn it into something that benefits others, not just your family. Holmes nodded, a rare gesture of agreement with Watson's sentiment. Dr. Watson speaks wisely. The spire's legacy need not be one of curses or greed. You have the resources to transform it, perhaps into a hospital, a school, or a charitable estate. Let the Ashburn name be remembered for generosity, not tragedy. Ashburn's eyes lit with a flicker of hope, though his expression remained heavy. You're right, both of you. I've been consumed by the past, by the weight of my ancestors' mistakes. I'll do as you suggest. The spire will become a beacon of good, a place of healing and learning. Holmes rose, his work in the great hall nearly complete. Then, our task here is done, Lord Ashburn. Ensure Grimshaw's compound is destroyed, and guard against such follies in the future. We shall take our leave tomorrow. As Holmes and Watson stepped out into the manor's courtyard, the servants gathered, their faces a mix of gratitude and awe. Watson took it upon himself to rally them, his military bearing lending authority to his words. Listen, all of you, he called out, his voice carrying across the cobblestones. The Frosted Spire is no longer a place of fear. Lord Ashburn has vowed to make it a home for good works. Stand with him, help him rebuild. You've seen what courage and reason can do. Let that guide you now. The servants murmured their assent, some wiping tears from their eyes. A young footman stepped forward, his cap in hand. Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes, we'll never forget what you've done. The spire's safe because of you. Holmes waved off the praise with a dismissive gesture, but Watson beamed, clapping the lad on the shoulder. Just do your part, my boy. That's thanks enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Holmes and Watson retired to their rooms, the weight of the case lifting from their shoulders. Watson sat by the fire, penning notes for his account of the adventure, while Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette stark against the fading light. It's a rare thing, Watson, Holmes said, his voice low, to see a place so transformed by truth. Grimshaw's defeat was not just a victory over a man, but over the shadows of superstition. Watson looked up from his notebook, his pen pausing. "You've done it again, Holmes. You've taken chaos and made sense of it. But tell me, do you ever tire of it? The endless puzzles, the danger." Holmes turned, his eyes glinting with a familiar fire. "Tire, Watson? The mind thrives on challenge. Without it, I'd be as lost as Grimshaw, chasing phantoms of my own making. No, my friend, as long as there are mysteries, I shall be there." To meet them, the next morning, they prepared to depart. Lord Ashburn met them at the manor's gates, his demeanor more resolute than before. He pressed a letter into Holmes's hand, his grip firm. "This is my pledge, Mr. Holmes," he sighed. "The Spire will be a charitable estate, open to those in need. I've already sent word to architects and benefactors. Your work here will not be forgotten." Holmes inclined his head, tucking the letter into his coat. "See that it is done, Lord Ashbourne. And should you ever need counsel, you know where to find me." The journey back to London was quiet, the moors stretching endlessly around them. As the train rattled southward, Watson, ever the chronicler, spent much of the trip refining his notes, determined to capture the eerie beauty of the spire and the brilliance of Holmes's deductions. Holmes, meanwhile, gazed out the window, his mind already drifting to the next challenge. Upon their return to 221B Baker Street, the familiar clutter of their rooms welcomed them. Mrs. Hudson bustled in with tea, her chatter about London's latest gossip a stark contrast to the grim moors they'd left behind. Holmes settled into his armchair, reaching for his violin as Watson began typing his manuscript for the Strand magazine. Days later, a package arrived from Yorkshire. Inside was a letter from Lord Ashburn detailing the first steps toward transforming the Spire into a charitable estate. Enclosed was a small crystal, a remnant of Grimshaw's compound, now rendered harmless. Holmes examined it briefly before placing it on the mantel, a quiet trophy of their triumph. Watson's account of the adventure, published in the Strand, captivated readers, cementing the legend of Sherlock Holmes. Letters poured in, some praising the detective's genius, others begging for his aid in new mysteries. Holmes, true to form, dismissed the fanfare, but Watson caught the faintest smile as he read Ashburn's letter aloud. "The Spire is thriving." "Holmes," Watson said, folding the letter, "you've given them a future." Holmes plucked a mournful note on his violin, his eyes distant. "A future, Watson, is only as strong as the reason that builds it. Let us hope Ashburn's resolve holds." As the strains of the violin filled the room, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of a new client, a new mystery. Watson glanced at Holmes, who set the instrument aside, his expression sharpening with anticipation. The Frosted Spire was behind them, its legacy secured, but the game, as ever, was afoot. Chapter 10. The final deduction. The familiar fog of London clung to the cobblestones of Baker Street, a gray veil that seemed to muffle the city's clamor as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson returned to the comforting disarray of 221B. The journey from the desolate Yorkshire moors, where the Frosted Spire had loomed like a spectre, had been long and wearying. Yet, as Watson pushed open the door to their lodgings, the scent of old books, tobacco, and Mrs. Hudson's distant cooking brought a sense of home that eased his travel-worn bones. Holmes, however, seemed impervious to fatigue, his sharp eyes already scanning the cluttered room as if the next mystery might be hidden among the papers and chemical vials strewn across his desk. Home at last. Watson, Holmes remarked, tossing his greatcoat over the armchair. Though I confess, the silence of London after the howling winds of the Spire feels almost disappointing. His lips twitched in a rare half-smile, but his gaze was already distant, lost in thought. Watson chuckled, setting his bag down and stoking the fire. Disappointing? I'd say it's a relief to be free of spectral demons and unnatural frost. A man can only endure so many chills before he longs for a warm hearth and a sensible cup of tea. Holmes raised an eyebrow, settling into his chair. With a violin case across his lap. Sensible, Watson. You wound me. The Frosted Spire was a puzzle of rare elegance, greed, betrayal, and a touch of chemical ingenuity masquerading as the supernatural. I shall miss its intricacies. Watson shook his head, accustomed to his friend's peculiar affection for the bizarre. He busied himself with unpacking, noting the stack of letters Mrs. Hudson had left on the table bills, inquiries, and the inevitable fan mail from readers of his Strand stories. One envelope, however, caught his eye, a thick cream-colored missive sealed with the Ashbourne crest. Holmes, it seems Lord Ashbourne has written already. The man's gratitude must be as prompt as his fear was fervent. Holmes plucked the letter from Watson's hand, slicing it open with a letter opener shaped like a miniature rapier. His eyes darted across the page, and he gave a satisfied nod. Ashbourne is no fool. He's turned the Spire into a charitable estate. It seems schools, hospitals, and the like. A fitting end to a legacy steeped in treachery. He thanks us profusely, of course, though I suspect he's more relieved to be rid of Grimshaw than of any curse. Watson smiled, warming his hands by the fire. A good man, despite his dabbling in alchemy. I hope he finds peace now that the Spire's secrets are laid bare. Holmes set the letter aside, his fingers already plucking idly at the violin strings. Peace is a fleeting thing, Watson. The human heart is too restless for it. But we've done our part, expose the demon as mere chemistry and greed. Speaking of which, I must draft a monograph on that freezing compound. Its potential for harm is considerable, and the scientific community must be warned. Watson nodded, settling into his own chair with a notebook. And I suppose I'll set to work on the tale for the Strand. The public will devour this one, Sherlock Holmes and the Demon of the Frosted Spire. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think? Holmes grimaced, though his eyes glinted with amusement. You and your penchant for the dramatic. Watson, very well, but do try to emphasize the logic over the theatrics. The compound's properties, rapid endothermic reactions catalyzed by a rare crystalline matrix, are the true marvel, not some ghostly apparition. Watson laughed, scribbling a note. I'll do my best, but the readers expect a touch of the uncanny. They'll want to hear of the frost-rimed manor and the chilling screams in the night. Holmes waved a dismissive hand, now tuning his violin with precision. Let them have their thrills, then. But mark my words, Watson, the real terror lies in the human mind, its capacity for deception, for twisting science into terror. Grimshaw was no demon, merely a man with a grudge and a formula. The fire crackled as Watson began to write, his pen scratching out the opening lines of their latest adventure. The room settled into a comfortable rhythm, Holmes's violin humming. A mournful tune, the fog pressing against the windows, and the distant clatter of London life. Yet, as Watson chronicled the events at the Frosted Spire, His mind wandered back to the desolate manor, its icy corridors, and the cunning of Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw. The case had begun with Lord Ashbourne's desperate letter, a plea born of fear and superstition. The Frosted Spire, perched on the windswept Yorkshire moors, had seemed a place out of time, its stones heavy with history and dread. Holmes had been intrigued by the mention of frost in midsummer, a meteorological anomaly that hinted at something beyond the natural. Their arrival had confirmed the strangeness. Frost coated the manor's walls, defying the warm July air, and the servants whispered of a demon that haunted the grounds. Holmes, of course, had dismissed the supernatural at once, his mind latching onto the tangible clues, the journal, the footprints, the crystalline substance. Watson paused, tapping his pen against the page. He recalled the frozen footprints in Chapter 2, how they vanished near the ancient stone circle, neither human nor animal. Holmes had crouched in the frost, his magnifying glass glinting, and declared them the work of a deliberate agent. The vicar's tale of a betrayed knight had added color, but Holmes had seen through the legend to the truth, a chemical trick, not a curse. The crystalline substance, later identified as a rare compound capable of inducing rapid freezing, had been the key. Watson marveled at Holmes's ability to strip away the myth and find the science beneath. The locked room riddle in Chapter 3 had been particularly chilling. The maid's body, encased in ice within a sealed chamber, had seemed the work of some malevolent force. Yet Holmes had noted the absence of water, the lack of any cooling mechanism, and linked it to the crystals. Watson's discovery of Ashbourne's hidden laboratory, filled with alchemical texts and coded notes, had deepened the mystery. Holmes's quick thinking in saving the laboratory from arson had preserved the evidence, pointing to a human hand orchestrating the terror. By Chapter 4, the stone circle had become the focal point. The cloaked figure chanting in the moonlight, the secret passage to the crypt, the relics inscribed with ancient symbols, each clue had drawn them closer to the truth. Holmes's identification of the chant as distorted Old English had hinted at a historical grudge, a thread that wove through centuries to the present. Watson shivered, recalling the ghostly light in the spire's tower, a beacon of deception rather than the supernatural. Holmes's analysis in Chapter 5 had been a turning point. The crystalline substance, a weaponizable compound, had revealed Ashbourne's experiments and Grimshaw's treachery. Tracking Grimshaw to the village, interrupting his attempt to poison the water supply, had been a race against time. Watson's pen moved faster now, capturing the tension of their pursuit. The moment Holmes secured the compound sample, his confidence unshaken even as Grimshaw slipped away. The journal's secrets in Chapter 6 had unraveled the historical betrayal. Sir Cedric, murdered by his brother for the Spire's lands. The dagger in the crypt, its blade etched with symbols, had confirmed the link to Grimshaw, a descendant driven by revenge. The ambush in the moor had tested their resolve, but Holmes's quick wits had prevailed. Watson smiled, remembering Holmes's vow to confront Grimshaw, even as the spectral figure watched from the shadows, a figure they now knew was no ghost. Chapter 7's chase to the abandoned mill had been a masterclass in Holmes's tenacity. Grimshaw's traps, rigged with the freezing compound, had nearly claimed Watson, but Holmes's ingenuity had saved the day. The map to the ritual site had set the stage for the climax, the ticking clock of the full moon driving them forward. Watson's heart had pounded as they reached the stone circle in Chapter 8. where Grimshaw's ritual threatened a catastrophic freeze. Holmes's counteragent, derived from the laboratory's notes, had neutralized the danger, and Grimshaw's capture had ended the threat. The resolution in Chapter 9 had been satisfying, if bittersweet. Grimshaw's confession, his obsession with reclaiming the spire for his family, had laid bare the human cost of greed. Ashburn's own confession, his attempt to undo the curse's stigma, had shown a man caught between past and present. Watson had admired Holmes's clarity in debunking the curse, revealing it as a myth perpetuated by avarice. The spire's frost melting away had felt like a metaphor for reason triumphing over fear. Now, in the warmth of 221b, Watson's account neared its end. He described Holmes's monograph, a dry but vital treatise on the freezing compound's dangers. The scientific community would heed his warning, ensuring Grimshaw's formula would not resurface. Watson's own story for the Strand would weave the tale for a wider audience, balancing the eerie atmosphere of the spire with Holmes's relentless logic. He glanced at Holmes, who was now playing a soft, intricate melody on his violin, the notes weaving through the room like threads of thought. "Holmes," Watson said, setting down his pen, "do you ever wonder if we'll run out of mysteries? This case felt singular, even for you." Holmes paused, his bow hovering above the strings. "The world is an inexhaustible well of human folly, Watson. Greed, vengeance, ambition, they breed puzzles as surely as the fog breeds shadows. There will always be another case." Watson nodded, returning to his writing. The Ashburn letter lay open on the table, its words a testament to their success. The spire, once a place of fear, was now a beacon of hope, its lands dedicated to charity. Watson penned the final lines, describing Holmes's satisfaction, the violin's mournful tune, and the promise of new adventures. As he finished, a knock at the door startled him, a sharp, insistent rap that hinted at urgency. Holmes's eyes gleamed, his violin set aside. "And so it begins anew," he murmured, rising to answer the call. Watson closed his notebook, knowing the tale of the Frosted Spire was complete. But the story of Sherlock Holmes was far from over. The knock echoed again, and Holmes opened the door, revealing a shadowed figure in the fog. Watson caught only a glimpse, a pale face, a trembling hand clutching a letter before Holmes waved him back. "Another day, Watson," he said, his voice alight with anticipation. "For now, let us savor the triumph of reason over the demon of the frost." And with that, the door closed, the violin resumed its song, and 221B Baker Street settled into the quiet rhythm of a mystery solved, with another waiting just beyond the threshold.